Hello Warhammer explorers. Before we dive in, hit subscribe so the next transmission isn't lost to the warp. What if the Emperor of Mankind arrived in Dungeons and Dragons? He studies 1,000 futures where his body withers on a throne and the stars die screaming. He refuses the arithmetic of cages. He forges a lattice of oaths and numbers, a choir of blanks to carry a living beacon. He sights a neighbouring firmament, thick with ordered magic, a web to knot the wound. He steps, and the breach opens like a sun cutting through winter sea. Light rips the sky above Waterdeep at dawn, a vertical wound over the harbour that turns every wave to hammered gold, and every rooftop to an altar of glare. Fishermen in the dock ward drop nets and stare. A gull hangs in the white blade of brightness as if nailed to air. On Castle Waterdeep's battlements, watch horns answer, and sending stones crackle with clipped voices. Unknown phenomenon. West by southwest. Height excessive. Hold the griffins. The light condenses into a figure, walking down through nothing. Robes and plates of auric armor, moving like banners in a wind only he can feel. Around him descend a dozen giants in burnished gold and red, their helms crowned with high crests, and a line of shaven-headed women in ash-grey cloaks whose eyes are still as winter. The first touch of his foot on the empty air buckles the weave. A ripple flows out over towers and spires like a silent thunderhead. The nearest mage apprentice gasps and drops her prepared spell as the rune lines on her palm go dark, then flare back, then dim again in a painful stutter. A skyship at anchor above the Field of Triumph stalls as its engine sigil flickers. It tilts, ropes screaming, people scrambling across the deck, and the weave sputters like a candle under a bell jar. The Emperor lifts one hand. The golden gauntlet opens, and the tilt stops as if the ship has remembered its own balance. Invisible stress sighs along beams, sails wrinkle, a mast that would have sheared off holds by a finger's width. Smoke curls from the seams of his glove. He lowers the vessel until its keel kisses the lawn, and the crew spill down ladders in shock, weeping and laughing with a wild relief of the almost dead. A boy presses his cheek to the grass and thanks every god he can name. The Emperor sways once and straightens. The grey-cloaked women step closer, and the air around them is a bowl of silence where sparks die and words thin to whisper. Griffin riders wheel in, beaks shining, harnesses clinking. A woman with silver hair and a mantle like moonlight lands first, her griffin's talons furrowing the lawn with a single precise cut. Her eyes take in armor, retinue, the silence field, the way the morning itself seems to arrange itself around this stranger. "I am Laeral Silverhand," she says, voice low and even. "Open Lord of Waterdeep, state your name and your peace." The Emperor's voice is warm iron. "I am he who bears the burden of man. I come to bind a wound in the world." His gaze lifts beyond her shoulder, to the harbour, to the black door in the water where shadows are thickening. "And you are about to be tested." A hollow percussion thumps through the harbour, 1, 2, 3, as if vast hearts have learned to beat underwater. The thumps coagulate into violet bulges on the surface, then split to reveal slick hulls with spiraled ribs and fins like knives. Nautiloids. They rise, shedding brine and the stink of cold thought. Slaves in wet chains stand on their decks blinking at the sun like moles, and the mind flayers at the railings tilt smooth heads, tasting the morning with absent mouths. Every wizard on the seaward parapets feels the slap of alien intellect crawl across their teeth. Scribes faint. A priest of Tyr staggers, bile on his tongue, eyes watering with the sudden memory of his first lie. The Black Staff's tower flares with wards and then gutters as the silence bowl around the golden cohort licks its lower reaches and eats sigils without malice. The Emperor's retinue shift with choreographed calm. Spears of impossible make slide from mag-locked clamps with a whisper like a hymn exhaling. The grey-cloaked women form a crescent, and the air hollows farther, a clean vacuum where glamours fall apart like wet paper. A custodian plants his boot, and the turf hardens under it, as if stone has grown there to greet him. On a balcony below the Black Staff, Vajra Safar steps out with hair like a storm, and a frown that could shave metal. She tastes the weave, tastes the deadness near the strangers, tastes the way their arrival makes the world's grammar cough. Lyril, she calls, and ascending hits the open lord's mind with a polite knock that still bruises. They suppress magic near them. Those ships smell of mine fire. Do not engage with spells inside their null. Lyril's chin tightens. She nods almost imperceptibly. To the stranger, she says, "You have seconds before everything you did becomes the least interesting thing that happened this morning. Then let the morning do as it must," the Emperor says, and he steps forward into the air again. He walks above the harbour, each footfall a suggestion to reality that is accepted without argument. A nautiloid swivels a cluster of lenses. A mind blast rips across the water like invisible sleet. 4 griffins stagger with a keening cry, riders clutching helms, teeth locked, eyes bleeding thin threads of red. The blast reaches the Emperor and goes around him like a river around a standing stone. The nearest mind flayer extends its hand. Purple filaments of thought snake out to wrap the sky around him. Bind, peel, pry. The Emperor's answer is a 1,000-year gaze. The filaments curl and blacken, not burned but convinced they will always smoke. He closes his hand into a sun the size of an apple. Heat is a suggestion too. The vortex detonates above the nautiloid without flame. The deck flexes, soft iron bones squeal, and the mind flayer falls off the side in an elegant silence. Its robes turning a grey shade of surprise on the way down. Slaves blink hard, as if a haze has thinned. One drops his spear and sobs like a man learning his own name again. The Emperor arcs his free hand outward, and a ribbon of force bowls a rope bridge of chain gang thralls onto the field of triumph, gently as if the world were being edited with kindness. "Keep them breathing," Lyril snaps to a squad of watch with truncheons and hearts bigger than their pay. "No spells near the cloaks. Use hands. Move." The Blackstaff's voice knifes into a dozen minds at once. Seaward parapets, pattern scythe, focus fire away from the nulls, strike at long range, aim for helm clusters, clergy of helm entire, pull nets, drown the psionic hum with hymns, loud now. Bells begin, not for ceremony, but for rhythm, and the dockside becomes a drumline of faith and fear. A nautiloid's maw opens like a flower, revealing a pit of blue lights that pulse in a rhythm no heart should keep. The pit leans, and a wave of anti-thought slams toward the Emperor with the refusal of a star that does not want to be seen. He braces. The grey-cloaked women inhale as one. The air around him becomes a bowl within a bowl. Silence nested inside silence. The wave breaks and spreads around their null like dye in clean water. One sister trembles. Blood threads down from her ear and vanishes into her collar. The Emperor's jaw works once and stills. He does not look back at her, but his hand flexes, and a small prayer in a dead language walks out along tendons and into the air. He reaches the first nautiloid and sets his palm against its hull. The iron remembers being ore. The wood remembers being sap and rain and forest shade. The hull sags around his hand, not melted, but persuaded back into unmaking. Bolts unwind like ideas revisited. Enchantments fray at their kindest stitches. The ship lists, then rests on the water. Crew staring up at the sky, as if permission must be asked for breathing. A griffin rider dives. She flings a weighted net that flares with mundane glitter rather than magic. It wraps a mind flayer in the democracy of rope. The Emperor sweeps his hand to help the net choose its target. For a second, the weave wants to rise to assist and is politely told to wait. On the quay, a fishmonger named Torlin puts his hand on his daughter's head and tells her not to look, then looks anyway because he is a man and there is something to witness. He sees the golden stranger bend to take a child from a slave chain and set her down with a nod as if saying, "You are a person again." Torlin does not know the names for the tears that jump into his eyes. He does not know how to measure this morning. He decides to live long enough to tell this with enough accuracy to keep the taste of it. A bell shatters at the sea ward when a beholder rises wet from the water between two nautiloids, eye stalks wiping themselves clear as if waking. The thing rotates like a thought deciding where to point, then fixes its great central eye on the Emperor. The weave in that cone dies cleanly, no huffing, no drama, just cessation. The air in front of it becomes a page with the words erased. The Emperor meets the blank with blank. The grey-cloaked women pivot. Their silence presses into the beholder's cone like one empty room leaning into another. The world between emptinesses groans. "Archmagus," Leril says under her breath. "Already," Vajra answers, stepping to her scrying pool, eyes narrowing. "I will work wide. He will work near. And if either of us lies, the other will be the lie's proof." Vajra's hands lift, not in the air near the golden cohort. She is not a fool, but high and far, where the weave is clear and clean. She draws a lattice of wind from the tops of towers, a pressure wave shaped like a hand, and claps it hard upon the beholder's flanks. The monster rolls, surprised, its eye cone swerving. Magic blossoms for an instant around the Emperor, bright as relief, then dims again as the cone finds him. Down, a watch sergeant roars, and 20 crossbows thrum. Bolts hum through the air like fast arguments. Many bounce, one catches an eye stalk. The beholder flinches. The Emperor steps into the lapse like it was scheduled. He seizes the beholder by a ridge that thinks it is a scale. His fingers sink a fraction, not enough to break the world, enough to explain to it the new hierarchy. He rotates a degree. The monster slaps back into the harbour wall and leaves a clean beholder-shaped dent in new stone. Its central eye closes with the finality of a slammed door. A sister's shoulders drop. A trio of harpers who have been pretending to be dockhands exchange precise looks and begin untying slaves with silent, practiced speed. The Emperor turns toward a nautiloid that has begun to submerge. He does not allow it. He reaches with 2 fingers, pinches the idea of down, and sets it on the pier, a scolded dog told to sit. The hull creaks. Men and women in shackles spill out like grain from a split bag. He breathes once, deep. The air around him glows faintly at the edges like hot glass. Codex note: null field projection from Pariah Choir produces a localized anti-magic bubble, approximately 20 paces across. Secondary effects include psionic attenuation and sympathetic suppression of ritual structures within line of sight. The harbour becomes a clock. Each second ticks with an action, netting, lifting, unmaking a chain's lock by telling it was never made, stepping between a mind blast and a griffin's wing. The Emperor wastes nothing. He does not gesture more than needed. He does not look heroic. He looks like work done correctly. Then the second wave arrives. From the wound left by the first breach, a ribbon of darkness spools down like charred silk. It touches the water and spreads like oil. Where it passes, the sea dims, not in colour, but in intention. A hymn, half sung across the bay, buzzes and falters, throats forget melody. A woman in the House of Heroes pauses mid-prayer to Tempest and feels for a single sick beat that the word war is meaningless noise. Vajra feels it first with her teeth. That is not the same, she says to no one, then to everyone, and ascending ribs through lanes and lofts. Far influence, not weave, not psionics I recognize. Do not stare at. A man on a quay stares into the ribbon and smiles with both lips and neither eye. He steps forward into the water as if it is a door. He forgets that he cannot breathe. His wife's scream draws a straight line through the morning. The Emperor turns. He knows the smell. Not the warp, not the same angle of wrong, but a cousin in a family that laughs at sanity. The grey-cloaked women step closer without being told. One's knees buckle. He catches her elbow with a tenderness that is not performance. Hold, he tells her. I will be the wall. He becomes it. The ribbon meets the silence and parts around it, coiling like smoke around a column. For an instant, the harbour is a diagram of negations. Weaveless cones from beholder. Weave dead bowl from sisters. Far wrong ribbon, all leaning and counterleaning. The diagram holds. The ribbon retreats, tasting, planning like a predator that has been bitten. Open, Lord, Vajra says softly, eyes on the wound. We need your voice to be the city's spine. We need to move these people out of any dead magic zones before someone tries a healing word that kills someone by failing. Lyral nods, takes a breath that is also a baton drop, and begins to speak. She does not shout. She speaks as if her voice is the city remembering itself. Waterdeep, hold. By my word we breathe. By our hands, not our spells, we save. Healers move bodies, not power. Guards pull folk from the null and into the song. Sing if you can. You, every one of you, can sing. A sailor starts humming without knowing why. Another joins. The humming becomes the scaffold across the dock ward onto which panic cannot easily climb. Men and women move ropes and bodies on that scaffold. A priestess of Mystra stares at her useless hands and then uses them anyway to bind a wound with cloth and promise. The Emperor walks back toward shore, boots tapping invisible steps, and steps onto the field of triumph as if stepping onto a page he will write on. Lyral meets him halfway. The custodians form a crescent behind him. The sisters float like parentheses of quiet. Vajra's shadow stands on the grass, where the weave has a better grip, and the shadow looks tired already. You saved thousands, Lyral says. Your arrival hurt hundreds. There is no accusation in it. There is no sweetness either. It will do so again, he says, equal and blunt. My burden is heavy for the fabric of this world. I will pay more for it, if I must. What is this cost? Vajra asks, the words filed and even as a good blade's edge. Weave suppression near you. It will interfere with our defenses, with our lives. Magic is not a luxury in this city. It is plumbing. My presence is a lit candle denying other candles oxygen, he says. The smoke is history. The flame is purpose. The bowl around me is not a choice. It is a prayer made into a device. The devices in this city pay taxes, Lyral says, soft as a joke that is also a law. We must plan. We must plan, he agrees, and the words land like a bridgestone. A griffin rider limps up, helmet under her arm, hair stuck to her forehead in points, mouth white around the edges. Reports, she says, and hands Lyral a slate with chalk marks from runners. Dock ward secured. 2 nautiloids beached. 1 sank, 1 fled. Unknown influence retreated but left. She fumbles for a word and fails. It left smudges. Vajra points with 2 fingers at the city map etched in a conjured pane of light held well away from the Silence Bowl. Smudges at Breakwater, Skullport Spillway, Deepwater Harbour Channel, and Laeral, Mount Waterdeep Crypt Mouth. That is not random. That is a contour. The Undermountain Mouth, Laeral says, eyes narrowing. Skullport below. If they mean to root an elder mind or build a bridge, they have one, the Emperor says, already turning his head toward the mountain that is the city's shoulder. Under your feet, under your hearts, a silence deeper than mine. Vajra draws breath like a swimmer before cold water. The elder brain rumoured under Skullport was thought dead or sleeping. Rumoured. I do not like that we are going to find out which. Laeral looks from the mountain to the harbour to the Golden Stranger. We plan, she repeats, and her voice changes from speaking to deciding. Blackstaff. Diagram counters away from our guest's null. Use non-weave structures. Steel, rope, fire, noise, light. Harpers. Start pulling names from these freed people. Where there is a chain, there is a map. Watch. Move the wounded out of dead zones. And you. She faces the Emperor formally now, the ways of her body making a treaty with the morning. What do I call you that is shorter than poetry? He inclines his head. Call me Emperor. It is less a title than a promise. Emperor, Laeral says, and the word sits surprisingly well in a city that has known kings and chosen against them. Walk with me. They walk. The field of triumph becomes a war room with no table, a map with no parchment. Runners flicker in and out with chalk marks. A harper with a face like a tree ring whispers news that is not exactly legal to have. A priest of Helm nods once at the Emperor and then spends his eyes on other duties. Vajra keeps her distance by a few paces, moving like a clever moon around a planet that has not earned her love. Your null will be a liability underground, she says. In the Undermountain, the weave is our path and our light. The harpers have mundane roots, but they cross traps older than our citizenship roles. If your field kills our light in the wrong corridor, the floor may simply decide it has been disrespected and cease. I will not ask you to love my cost, the Emperor says. I will ask you to price it correctly. Then price this, she says, pointing. The conjured map fades, replaced by a chalked canvas carried by a runner and stabbed with pins that have honest gravity. Mind flayers favour slaving from beneath. They will reach to Skullport, not break a gate at noon in front of the castle. But this far taste, that is something else. If it is the far realm pressing through our wounds, it will prefer places of neglect and sumps of madness. The Xanathar's tunnels, the old temple vault of Moanda, the dry cistern beneath the yawning portal. 3 points, Laeral says. We cannot guard them all. We must strike one to prevent two. We choose. Choose Skullport, the Emperor says without hesitation. Cut the brain and the hands weaken. Your beholder can be charmed, bribed, or killed in tide. A mind city is sticky. It will shape the world into itself if you allow it. Vajra's mouth tightens, not in disagreement, but in the motion that means a professional has been told a truth she already knew and must live with. Skullport, she repeats. We will need a guide who knows it intimately and hates it sincerely. A woman in plain clothes is already stepping out of a shadow with the correct expression. She has the harper look, the one that says she has burned personal letters and will remember every line. Ramalia, she says, offering a hand to Laeral first. Spymaster, if we must say it aloud, I will give you the paths that will not get you edited out of the Undermountain's grammar. Laeral squeezes her hand and then releases it because both of them have duties. Bless you and your treasons, she says. Price. The price is that we will need to do something nearly pious, Ramalia says, glancing at the grey cloaked women with open calculation. that is not cruel. Bring your null choir, but learn to sheath it like a blade. Turn it, do not wear it. We will need stealth as much as we need silence. The Undermountain has ears and its master has appetites. The Emperor nods to the sisters. One returns the nod with the minimal movement allowed by discipline and by a headache that is going to teach her about its father later. We can shape our quiet, he says. It will cost them. And you, Vajra says, unflinching. And me, he agrees. They sketch a plan with mundane tokens. Pennies, pebbles, a ring pulled off a finger and set as a gate, a knife as an arrow not to threaten, but to point direction with seriousness. Griffin riders will sweep the dock ward for any second wave. The black staff will work high, building nets of wind and light well above the null bowl to slap down anything that tries to climb out of wrongness. Larul will be the voice and the rope, binding panic into action. Romalia will lead through a tunnel that is a rumor even to her, because that is what rumors are for. Your armor, Romalia says to the Emperor, as she takes his measure as one measures a house one may have to burn. Can you make it not bright? I can make it dim, he says. I cannot make it shame. Dim will do, she says, and turns away because she trusts her own joke to keep her from fear for 3 seconds. He kneels to the sister whose ear bled. Her lashes are damp. She stares at a place just above his shoulder where pain does not exist. He touches her temple with a finger that has known 1,000,000 foreheads and never become bored of the miracle of bone under skin. Name, he says. Severine, she whispers. You have carried more weight than your years, he says. Carry this now. I need you alive. Her mouth sucks in air in a soundless wail that is not sadness and not joy. She nods, one hard nod. The headache writes a line across her skull like a script in acid. She stands because she is asked. They move, not with trumpets, not with banners, not as a parade that demands story. They move like an argument formed into bodies, straight, brief, full of points. The yawning portal yawns. Durnan looks at the Emperor as if at a new kind of coin, and then chooses to see him as a man, because Durnan has stayed alive by choosing well. You'll pay for the ropes if you cut them, Durnan says without looking up from the ledger he is not actually writing in. You look like the sort who breaks ropes. I mend, the Emperor says with a small smile that is also a history. They descend. Light changes in the Undermountain. It is not darker, it is older. It is light that has already seen many eyes and knows it will see more after you. It disdains to be impressed. The Emperor's footfalls become instruction again, not to the air but to stone. The weave tests itself against the sister's quiet and finds, with surprise, that it can cooperate if a little space is made for breathing. Romalia leads with a hand against the wall as if greeting an old friend she does not like. There is a door that is not a door, she says. We will use the crack beside it. We will not be the first to use it. That will make it safer and worse. Traps glance off the null like thrown ideas hitting a tired mind. A rune sees the stoppered weave and simply refuses to exist until they pass. A net of scything blades deployed by a bored wizard who needed to feel clever once meets an auric shoulder and does math poorly. The Emperor moves with economy. Every time he touches the world it changes, and every time it changes there is a cost. A sister coughs once and threads of blood hang in the air for a fraction before deciding to fall. A custodian's gauntlet steams for a heartbeat where a rust god's rot should have taken his hand away truthfully and does not. They pause in a chapel cut into rock as if the stone had wanted to pray. Votive candles are stubbed to metal plates, wax lakes. A statue with 6 arms and no face stands, with its hands open to a god who might be tired of hands. Larul bows because she bows in rooms like this, even if the god is not currently paying rent. Vajra watches the Emperor watch. His watching is not judgment. It is assessment of what must be protected to keep people human. Romalia steps close as a friend who could be an enemy if the city needed it. "What do you call your ethic?" she asks, without reverence. "To build a place where man is safe to choose," he says, "and where those choices have weight. Weight crushes," she says. "Weight strengthens," he says. "Weight means your bones know their own names." She almost smiles and then remembers work. "Skullport," she says, left at the smell of salt and fish and regret. That is not poetry, that is a map. They pass under an arch where a pair of carved eyes blink once and then decide they did not. The air turns damp with the breath of below city. Voices begin. Not words, but commerce and crime and the industry of surviving beneath. A boy runs past with a string of dried fungus like sausages. A woman sells knives that are honest knives. A man with a tattoo around his eye pretends not to recognize Romalia and does her the courtesy of succeeding. Skullport opens like a rotten flower into a grotto of bridges and hanging lanterns and water that has already told you what is in it without being asked. The smell is salt and rot and people. The city above is a diagram. This is a confession. The Emperor's presence draws looks and then bent heads, and then the old instincts of prey pretending to be stone. A ripple moves under the water, as if a sleeping breath has been pulled in. Lamps sway. Someone laughs in a way that says the laugh is not in the room anymore. Romalia quickens her pace. The sisters close ranks. The custodian's spears lift a degree as if smelling weather. A voice slides into the Emperor's head like a hand into warm clay. "Welcome," it says without letters. It is not a greeting. It is an attempt at authorship. The voice tastes him. It pulls back. It is puzzled. It has touched fire that burns ideas. The Emperor answers with a wall of quiet that is not silence but refusal. He does not put a message in it. He lays down a boundary so clean a god would be tempted to sign it. Beneath the central wharf, where the water heaves without waves, the elder brain wakes up properly and decides that the name it keeps for itself is more fun when exchanged. It will be called the Concord of Silted Thoughts until it finds a better joke. It feels the city above and the city below. It feels the ribbon of far wrongness curled like a broken necklace under Mount Waterdeep. It feels the golden man like a knot in its net. Lyrel's hand finds the hilt of a sword that is not for show. Vajra's eyes shudder as she sends without moving her lips. Lines of coordination skittering like silver eels along minds that have consented to be touched. Romalia's fingers find a signal in the air and twitch it once. Friends up ahead. 2. One with a scar that used to be named. "Speak and be quick," Lyrel says. Voice a needle threaded with steel. "We are in the mouth of our enemy's book." The Emperor looks at the water. He sees not waves, but breathing. He sees thought like kelp, slow and patient and ready to tangle legs. He sees the far ribbon leaning in, curious, wanting to learn this taste of mind-eating so it can do it worse and longer. He speaks with no ritual, as if saying the plan makes it truer. We strike the brain with near and far hands. Near, my choir and I will shear its field, make a room in its head that is not its head. Far, your black staff and your voices will sing the city's name in the weave above so loudly. The weave remembers which grammar is hers, and not this thing's. We use ropes and knives and light where magic will not go, and magic where my quiet will not go. We move fast and clean. We cut, and then we leave before the mountain decides to learn us. Lyrel nods once. "And if the ribbon comes, then you will see me pay," he says, and it is almost gentle. "Good," Vajra says, as if relieved by the promise of arithmetic. Because I am going to send a prayer to Mystra that is also a lawsuit. They move onto the central wharf. Romalia's contact is a fisher with eyes like open doors and a scar shaped like a question mark. He nods once, then twice, and flips a lever hidden under a pile of rotten rope. The wharf groans and slides. A hole yawns where water should be. Instead, there is a stair of stone with the patience of a glacier. Old wet air lifts out, tasting like a cellar that knows your family name. Down, Romalia says, and then left. And then we are in a room that will pretend not to be one. You will know it by the way your teeth itch like someone else owns them. The Emperor goes first because he always has. The sisters follow with their silence like a mantle they have learned to drape and fold rather than slam. The custodian's boots strike sparks not of fire but of intention. Laeral moves like a person who has learned to be more dangerous by being calm. Vajra glances up once at the rock overhead, as if scolding it, and then goes down because she is brave in ways nobody pays for. The stair ends in a corridor that is honest about being nervous. Rock sweats quietly. The weave hums around their null like a singer practicing a part not hers. The floor nods to the Emperor's weight, as if consenting to be stood upon by a king it would not have invited. The room pretends not to be one until they are inside, and then it is all at once. A bubble carved into rock, walls slick with condensed thought, a pool that is not water but soup, and in the soup a brain the size of a wagon, pulsing with the steadiness of a god who is bored by heartbeats. Veins run from it into the rock, into the city, into minds that do not know they are least. The elder brain surface ripples with pleasure at being looked at by this new thing. The ripple sends words without nouns. The words try to be law. The Emperor steps into the ripple and denies its citizenship. The sisters flare, not louder but cleaner. The room's sound dies. The weave draws back. The air wets with silence. The brain flinches as if an old scar has been pressed. Laeral draws but does not advance. Vajra raises empty hands and does not cast. Romalia watches the doorway behind them, as if the city will choose this moment to remember an old debt. The custodians lower their spears, with the affection of men meeting a task they like. The elder brain tries the old games, sweet memory, conjured guilt, and offered childhood, where different choices were made and different sons were kept. It presses pictures against the Emperor's mind, and they slide off like rain off oil. He does not sneer. He does not pity. He exists in a way that makes pity and sneer too small. He puts his palm out. He does not touch the brain. He touches the world where the brain insists it is the world. He speaks in a language that has counted legions and graves, and still believes both can be made less numerous. Yield, he says. The brain laughs without lungs. It shows him a tide of slaves flowing up into water deep like sewage, and calls the tide inevitable. It shows him a ribbon from another wrongness dipping into it like a straw. It shows him a city in 10 years, where songs are advertising for chains. He does not argue the pictures. He deauthorizes the premise. His choir stirs. Severin makes a sound like a note a throat was not shaped to sing, and still chooses to. The silence flowers. The weave retreats one more pace, makes a ring. And in that ring, the elder brain is not the only thing allowed to define. The Emperor closes his fingers and the ring shrinks. The elder brain screams privately. The room does not shake. The water soup does not splash. All the movement is in thought, and all the damage is to the claim of what counts. The brain thrashes through ideas like a drowning person through air. It bites his mind and breaks its teeth. What is that sound? Laeral asks very quietly. Choice, Vajra says. That is the sound of choice being reintroduced to a place that had been monopolized. the elder brain finds a new angle. It reaches for the ribbon. The far wrongness leans in, amused, eager to cause a worse flavor of harm with someone else's tools so it can learn how they break. The ribbon touches the ring. The sisters stagger. Two go to one knee, as if struck in the back by a cold hand. Severine's lips crack. Her blood tastes like a story that will not be believed later. The Emperor's jaw tightens and something behind his eyes darkens and then steadies. He steps forward and becomes the wall more fully. The ring holds. The ribbon recoils, stung by something it does not recognize. A moral refusal shaped into physics. The elder brain gurgles a thought that means nothing and means hatred anyway. Now, the Emperor says, and the custodians move with all that gold made into speed. They do not stab flesh. They stab the medium around it. They drive their spears into the soup, and the soup forgets to be supportive. They carve channels that do not fill, not because physics have been disrespected, but because the idea of filling has been told to sit in the other room until this instruction is complete. The brain sags. Veins pop wetly and then dry in an instant, as if embarrassed. Romalia's head snaps up at the door. "Friends," she says, and two men with the wrong smell step into the corridor with smiles that are jobs. She moves like an apology that must be sent fast and knives flash, and apologies are accepted in bloodless ways that still end with men down. The elder brain throws a last old trick. It steals the memory of oxygen from the room. For an instant, everyone forgets how to inhale. A child above in Skullport drops a toy and cannot recall why he has lungs. Laerul starts to black at the edges of her vision and then remembers song. She sings. It is not pretty and it is not priestly. It is the song of a woman who knows names. She sings the city's name into the room. The weave stirs at the door like a dog hearing home. It cannot come in, not yet, but it leans. Vajra lifts her hands high, far from the null, and writes a circle of air that keeps forgetting to be air and keeps being told that it is anyway. People breathe, badly, and then better. The Emperor closes his hand one last inch. The ring collapses to a point. The elder brain is allowed to be only as large as its ethics. It is small. It pops without sound. The soup stills. The veins cease. The room smells like old pennies and disappointment. Laerul exhales in something like a laugh, something like a prayer. Vajra leans her head back and says something to Mystra that is half thanks and half complaint and holy love. Romalia checks the corridor again and decides not to fall down. Severine sits very carefully on the floor and places her palms on her knees, as if the world might slide if she does not. The Emperor kneels to her again. "Name," he says, "because it is a ritual now, and rituals keep the world from melting." "Severine," she says, "because keeping the world is work." He nods. "You stood." She snorts something like a laugh. "I did not fall." "It counts," he says gently, and stands to face Laerul, Vajra, Romalia, his custodians, and the invisible eyes of a city above that has just felt a thread loosen under its streets and not snap. "This is the beginning," he says, "not to frighten and not to boast. We cut a hand. The thing behind the hand will choose a different tool. Your beholder will not like the smell of this. Your criminals will decide that today was not profitable. The ribbon will learn, and I am a wound to your weave that will not stop hurting you." Laerul sheathes her blade with the neat one click of a person who wants to hear that sound, because it tells her the world is at least that well ordered. Then we will be a city that can price pain and still pay. Vajra looks at the sisters, at their grey mouths and hot eyes, and nods once, as if to an equal. "We will have to write rules," she says, and the prospect comforts her like a sharp bed. Romalia tucks a strand of hair behind her ear and smiles without mirth. and we will have to break them, she says, because that is her bed. The Emperor inclines his head, as if acknowledging a council that did not yet exist and now does. Above, bells change rhythm with a precision that feels like a decision. The harbour's last nautiloid bleeds ink and slips under the waves, not in victory, but in a criminal's retreat. The ribbon curls under Mount Waterdeep and thinks in a direction that would make men go quiet if they heard it. The city breathes. They climb. Skullport watches them go with the careful eyes of those who have learned not to commit to emotion until it is safe. A boy picks up his toy and remembers why lungs are good and why the toy matters. A woman selling knives looks at the golden man and prices him in her head, and then throws away the sum because it is not helpful. At the yawning portal, Durnan closes the ledger he was not writing in, and nods once to the Emperor as if counting him and finding the number agreeable. Ropes are intact, he says. I mended them, the Emperor says. I saw, Durnan says, which is also a receipt. On the field of triumph, the wounded lie in careful rows and the air smells like blood and salt and early sun. Healers work with cloth and splints and voices. When the null bowl moves away, magic creeps back like a cat returning to a house after a visitor leaves. A priest of Tyr tries a prayer and it lands. A child's fever bows to a word. A woman who thought her arm was lost finds fingers again and names them out loud in gratitude. Lyril speaks to a crowd without mounting anything. She stands on grass. The city stands with her. We live, she says. We price our living. This is the man who hurt us and saved us, she continues, nodding at the Emperor with a courtesy that is also a dare for him to contradict it. We will write with him and against him. We will not stop being ourselves, because a new grammar has arrived. The Emperor does not address the crowd. He looks at them as if absorbing their faces into a place where he will keep them, even when he leaves, which is a promise he does not say aloud, because it would be a lie, and he does not lie casually. He looks at the harbour wound and the mountain wound and the people wound. He counts. He does what he has always done. He plans. Vajra steps to his left and does not look at him as she speaks. I will be suspicious, she says. Not because I hate you, because I am paid to be suspicious of things that change how the weave breathes. Good, he says. I will be cautious. Not because I fear you, because I am paid to keep humans alive. Lyril smiles with a shape that men have followed into battle and out of beds. Then we have a government, she says. A balance between suspicion and caution. Remelia will insert treason, and the city will survive. Remelia bows as if introduced in a salon rather than on a battlefield. You see me, she says. That will make my job worse and better. A runner arrives with chalk on his cheek. Open Lord, he pants. The Blackstaff's tower reports. Pressure on the weave. Gentle. Like someone putting a hand on a door they do not intend to open yet, from the mountain. The ribbon, Vajra says. And the beholder has gone to ground, Remalia adds, which means it is buying friends. The Emperor looks at the mountain and the sky and the faces. He does not say destiny. He does not say duty. He says, next, and the word falls into the city and seeds 1,000 plans. They make a council in the castle with maps pinned with bones and bottle caps, and lists written in hands that will be recognized in windows and alleys tonight. Griffin riders sleep sitting up for 10 minutes at a time. The harpers emerge and submerge like clever fish. Priests argue theology with midwives because both groups have seen too many births to be lied to about what costs. In a quiet moment that feels like a stretched string, Lyril brings bread and salt and a chair to the Emperor on a balcony with wind. She sits, he does not, because he belongs to the posture of standing. What do you want? She asks. without ice and without stupidity. Man alive, he says, as if saying it can make the size of the want manageable. In my city, she says, because scale matters. In every city, he says, because scale matters. She laughs once, wondering how long laughter will be allowed. Then we will start with mine, she says, and we will charge interest. He inclines his head. Agreed. He turns to go to the next plan and stops because the grey-cloaked women are there. One with a bandage like a white line, one with a steady mouth and shaking hands, all with eyes like the spaces between notes. He looks at them the way a general looks at the stones with which a wall is built. He looks at them the way a father looks at a daughter who carries a burden he would lift if he could without hurting her, by denying her strength. Severine meets his eyes without flinching. We will go again, she says. You will, he says, and you will live to learn how to rest. I require it. She almost smiles. That is a hard order. It is a holy one, he says. Below, Waterdeep lights lamps against a day that has not decided to end. The harbour water shivers and then stills. The mountain breathes and then holds its breath like a teasing god. The city waits like a hand on a hilt, not to draw, but to be ready to. And the new grammar of the morning, written in gold and rope and blood and silence, waits with it. They severed the elder brain. The city breathes, but the mountain and the ribbon refuse to forget. Work begins before the cheers end. Griffins sweep low with trail lines of mundane nets weighted with iron washers. Watch sergeants hammer bell frames into parapets. Ropes run from tower to tower like arteries. When psionic pressure rises, the bells answer in staggered cadence until human ears can tell where the mind wind is coming from. Carpenters lay planks across alley roofs to make null-safe causeways that won't dump a healer into darkness if the weave coughs. The Emperor moves among them with the patience of a mason. He lifts, sets, aligns. He drags a skiff ashore with 2 fingers when it threatens to crush a line of children. He touches a cracked keystone, and the crack closes the way a wound closes after someone says the hurt is over. He stands with a squad of teenagers and shows them how to brace a ladder so the person on it stops being a person and becomes a load. Vajra repurposes the city's light. She speaks to polished copper mirrors as if they are her apprentices and stations them on rooftops in loose arcs. No magic sleeps in the glass. It is only light made obedient. When a beholder's central eye opens and the weave falls away beneath it, a dozen mirrors flex light across its flanks, flooding peripheral stalk eyes until they blink blind. Crossbowmen count heartbeats and fire into the pause as if practicing good manners. Griffin riders learn a new dance. They cut down instead of through. They bank wide of the sisters' quiet and let the null chew a hole in an anti-magic cone so other riders can thread magic through it like sewing. A rookie misjudges by a wingtip and slaps the field hard enough to lose a feather. She lives because her partner anticipated the mistake and flew wrong on purpose. In Dock Ward, a chain gang of thralls panics at the sight of gold and grey. The Emperor does not rip the chains. He speaks to the man with the hammer. "Give me 3 blows," he says. "Put your breath on the head and put your name in the stroke." The man swings. The link parts on the 2nd blow, and the hammerer begins to cry so hard he cannot do the 3rd. A custodian does it for him and pretends the blow belonged to the crying. On the sea, ward wall, priests of Helm anchor mundane shutter doors at embrasures so that when mind fire flares, a hinge can save a life as well as a blessing. A boy tasked to a crank stares at the Emperor like a painting that learned to breathe. "Crank when the bells call twice, breathe on the odd beats," the Emperor says, and the boy nods with such seriousness that his ears turn red. In Skullport's shadow canals, Remalia's small knives cut threads that would have tied freed people back to their old masters through debt and paperwork. Contracts, she mutters to herself, tasting the word for rot. A city's disease made polite. She files names and seals behind her eyes and makes promises the open lord will later be forced to honor, smiling and swearing creatively. Codex. Note, mirror line arrays and bell lattices are non-weave countermeasures synchronized to external psionic signatures. They function within and across null perimeters and degrade morale effects by restoring rhythm and horizon cues to affected units. The first victory becomes a growth habit. The Xanathar Guild pokes out a feeler and loses a hand. A nautiloid surfaces in the night beyond the breakwater. 3 fishing boats roped to the bell lines and steered by women with arms like dock posts. Close and tangle it in embarrassing human rope faster than it can think, without the weave to help. The Emperor does not crush its hull. He convinces it to drift to a sandbar and wait for a decision the city will make together in daylight. By noon, a makeshift war room buzzes in Castle Waterdeep. Chalkboards, full of bluing lines, the smell of brass and paper. A scale model harbour hammered from pewter on a breadboard that once held breakfast. Maps are held down with mugs and stones and a custodian's gauntlet. The Blackstaff's tower throws light sheets onto walls far from the sisters' reach. Runners stick pins with as much ceremony as a knighting. Laeral stands at one end with a sheaf of reports and the durable patience of a person who can hold 17 problems in one hand and not let any of them bite. Vajra stands on the other with shadowed eyes and a mouth that looks like it was honed today. Remalia is the hinge between them, the hinge that also packs a blade. They praise beginning with the least articulate. "We didn't drown," says a watch corporal whose head is bandaged into a new shape. "We did not drown when it would have been easy." "Excellent," Laeral says. "We will build a holiday to celebrate not drowning, but later. Anxieties. The null radius," Vajra says. "It moves with you. It's shapeable, yes, but it drags our wards like kelp. A ward network is a network because it holds. Your field makes holes. This morning's remedies worked because they were clever and fast and God's blessed, but they are patches. I cannot guarantee the tower's long work will hold near you, and I cannot train every apprentice out of the habit of turning to the weave when frightened." A cleric in hammered steel speaks for the Triad, the alliance of Tyre, Torm, and Ilmater. His name is Sir Faerûn Greycloak, and he has the exact face of a fair judge who sleeps poorly. "There is mercy in your hand," he says to the Emperor. "We saw it, but there is also a weight in your name. An Emperor announces himself in Waterdeep, and the law must ask, under whom does he stand? The Triad recognizes right order when it sees it, and tyrants when it does not." Remalia folds her hands like a woman settling ashore. "We are Waterdeep," she says. "We don't bend knee to kings. We bend knees to get under beams and lift. I will steel man what most won't say out loud. Some fear that your mercy is the mercy of a hammer, gentle until it isn't. If we lean on you, will we forget how to use our own legs? The Emperor does not bristle. He has been bristled at by people who could erase planets with a frown. He answers like a craftsman. You will not be allowed to forget, he says. I will build with you. I will not replace you. If I do, I will have failed both of us. Doctrine, Vajra says, waving a hand to slice the word from air. Freedom versus survival. Mercy versus doctrine. Let's speak it cleanly. Sir Faerûn's voice fills the room like lawful light. Mercy that endangers the flock is not mercy. Mercy that breaks the law teaches thieves that the law is soft. If we save 100 today and invite 1,000 deaths tomorrow because our walls are sentimental, we have failed the god's trust. Laeral nods to him. and then turns her face to the Emperor. And the other steel. Doctrine that forgets the person is not doctrine. It is metallurgy, the Emperor says. If your law protects stone before it protects a child, you built a monument instead of a city. Survival without the right to choose is a long, polite annihilation of the human story. Vajra steps between those lines with her own thin blade. Freedom includes the freedom to cast foolishly in a null and die. Survival includes the survival of a grammar, the weaves, without which Waterdeep becomes a louder Baldur's Gate. The weave's law is not negotiable. It is the commons. A commons is not a deity, Sir Faerûn says, and his disagreement manages to be fond. There is no shouting. The room is adults doing adult arithmetic. Romalia keeps her eyes on the doorway, because politics has taught her that the most dangerous thing always arrives while decent people are still proving they can disagree well. The runner who breaks into the room is pale under street dust. Open Lord, spire of the Castellantas, smoke without flame, chanting not of any temple, doors shut by polite magic. Their lawyers are on the steps reading rights at the watch like a spell. Laurel's mouth does not move for a beat. Her eyes do. The Castellantas, she says, and swallows distaste. Old money, new devotions. They were turned back from full disgrace once. My mistake not to burn the rot to the roots the first time. Vajra's hand flexes. Asmodean cult, contract engines, law strained into chains, she says, and looks at Sir Faerûn with an apology and a dare. Sir Haroon's jaw tightens the way a decent man's jaw tightens when his god's neighbours are insulted for the neighbour's sins. We do not share courts with hell, he says. We share procession routes under guard so that criminals can see what they are not. Their magic is the kind that gets past my null, the Emperor says quietly. Contracts are not the weave's accidents. They are consent hardened into structure. I have built with oath and calculus. That makes me edible to their math. Romalia lifts a brow. Then we smoke out their kitchen. They run. The castle disgorges intention into streets that have learned to catch it. The Castellanta villa is a white grin on a hill. Gates closed, lawyers on the steps with scrolls full of poison courtesy and hexed punctuation. The watch stands 5 deep, letting the lawyers think they are loud, while runners carry the real news. A smell of hot parchment and something coppery breathes from the villa's moor. Chanting threads through windows. It does not ask faith, it asks compliance. The Emperor stops at the gate and looks at the iron as if asking it what it wants. The gate unhooks itself because it is a gate, and gates know the dignity of their own purpose when a person reminds them. Inside the courtyard, a circle is inscribed in gold leaf on stone, 10 paces wide, impeccable, surgical. In the circle sits an engine that is not gears but clauses. It has facets like cut law. Light filters through it in terms and conditions. Around the engine stand devils in livery. Amnesus with buckskin scrolls and inked teeth. Erinyes with scales of black steel and roses tattooed like redacts around their wrists. The Castellantas themselves kneel at their own altar, flanked by accountants. Vajra stands at the threshold of the null and raises both palms. Do not cast, she says to herself out loud, as a promise to the part of her that adores light and pattern and wants to fight with her native grammar. Do not touch the weave where it will be made a witness for the prosecution. Sir Faerûn steps into the courtyard with his shield high and his conscience higher. You have been warned, he says to the family and their devils. Twice. You will break your machine and leave. Now, the Amnesu smiles with exactly the warmth necessary to close a deal with a drowning man. The contract is already signed. The sentence ends at the Emperor's lifted hand. No, he says, and the engine's glow dimples around the word like a wax seal pressed by a thumb. He does not smash the engine. He speaks its language. He reads the clauses as if he has eaten worse codes and survived. He follows each conditional down into its spine, untying where he can, tightening where he must, making a path for human steps between sharpened words. Sweat beads along his hairline. It is not heat. It is concentration latticed into mercy. The engine shivers and tries a different clause. The Emperor's oath lattice, numbers, prayer, blanks, tightens to resist. The devils grin wider because he is speaking in a courtroom where they hold bar. The engine finds a clause that is not about power, but about consent and yanks. The null choir gasps. 3 sisters fall to one knee, palms slapping stone as if to keep from being pulled through paper. The Emperor staggers. His name rings inside his skull like a struck coin. The engine offers jurisdiction over oaths. It files a lien against his lattice. It tries to repossess his promise to bear man. Pain does not make him beautiful. It makes him precise. Severine, he says, voice raw iron. Repeat after me. We do not consent to alien adjudication of our interior bonds. We stand under the law of the living. Severine's mouth is blood and obedience. We do not consent, she whispers, then louder, and the choir catches the sentence and makes it an antiphon. We stand under the law of the living. The Amnizu hisses and flips a leaf of the engine. The clause tries to reframe their refusal as a refusal to fulfill their own oaths. The Emperor accepts the reframing and converts it. We refuse to betray our oaths by misplacing them in a hell's ledger, he says. His hands shake. Runes of light glitch along his gauntlet, and then steady. Laral's sword whispers out. Tell me where to cut that does not kill children, she says, blade point low. Draw a line here, the Emperor says, pointing to a ring of thin script around the engine. Those are forfeiture terms masquerading as protective spells. Cut the surrenders, leave the protections. Lyral bends, and the open Lord of Waterdeep does calligraphy with steel. She lacks the weave's assistance. She does not lack practice. Each narrow slash erases an admission of guilt that would have chained a city. She sweats into her collar and does not sniff, because she is the professional of the old school. Sir Faerûn shoulders an Erinyes the way honest men shoulder burdens. He is polite about it. He does not cut her. He puts his shield against her and walks until she is in a corner, where he can hold her there with the law of rectangles and gravity. Stay, he says to a creature that could tear him. It obeys because a better law has been invoked without spells. Rammelia vanishes into a side passage and returns with an armful of ledgers. She drops them in a fountain on principle. Then she fishes out one by a corner because it contains names. She will not throw away names, not even a Casalanta child who will hate her later for saving them. Vajra watches, fingers clawed with restraint. She cannot cast inside the null. She can cast over the house. She calls wind and it slaps windows shut and holds them like helpful hands so no ritual smoke will trail into the street and poison a crowd that came to gawk. The engine finds leverage under the Emperor's title. Emperor, it writes in Lawlight, and underlines it with jurisdictional brackets reaching toward him. It does not care that the word has different weight in different worlds. It cares that the bearer of the word has made oaths. He sets his feet as if digging into a battlefield. He is pale now. I am Emperor because there is no other, he says, teeth bared. Not because I claim you. He signs his refusal with blood from his mouth. The engine shudders for the first time, as if embarrassed to be reminded of living bodies. Severine's voice rises into a rasp that still holds pitch. We stand under the law of the living. The choir's bowl narrows to a clean white. The courtyard's colours dim, as if the world wants to see the boundary more clearly. A ringing like the smallest bell the city owns threads the noise. The engine collapses the perimeter of its circle by inches, trying to trap him in its clauses. The Emperor steps into it and makes it a meeting instead of a prison. He takes a clause in his left hand like a snake, and with his right hand grabs the admission of consent that would make the clause a chain. He feeds the admission to the refusal, and the two cancel like chimes ringing a perfect opposite. The engine coughs law smoke. The Amnesu blinks as if water has been thrown in his face and looks genuinely pained by the discourtesy. Lyrel's blade finds the last surrender term and cuts it out of the rock like rot from a beam. Sir Faerûn moves his shield away, and the Erinyes does not attack him out of either awe or eccentricity, or both. The engine goes still. The devils look at one another like salesmen whose pitch has been declined by a farmer who knew what seed costs. They bow because hell bows when the court is not theirs, and vanish with a smell like ink burned in sugar. The Cassalanters do not look relieved. They look as if the bill has come and includes charges they knew about and more they did not. "We will pay," Lord Cassalanter says with the pride of a man whose line refuses to have no pride even minutes before collapse. "You will," Lyrel says flatly, "but not with blood that is not yours." She does not look at the children, because she is not cruel. The Emperor steps away from the dead engine. He sways. He does not fall. He bleeds a thin line from his ear that dries before it reaches his jaw. Severine's hand rises half an inch and then lowers because he is not hers to steady in public, and because she is steadied by keeping her hand at her side. He breathes. The null holds. The weave around the villa trembles like a scolded animal and then lies down beside the quiet instead of under it. Power scaling. Interlude. Over wine that is not drunk. Vajra explains with chalk in a side room how this enemy bit so deeply. Devil law is not woven. It is signed. The weave flows around it because it is anchored in consent rather than spell work. His power uses oath structure, equations bound to human promises, not only raw force, and that gives hell purchase if his consent can be reframed. Anti-magic cannot dissolve a promise that was made by a living mind. It can only make a space where the promise is easier to hear. If his choir breaks their own names with exhaustion, his null will wobble and devil law will slide in like a knife under armor. The War Council reconvenes with more bruises and fewer illusions. The room smells faintly of burned paper. The engine's bones sit on the table as a diagram, so nobody forgets what confidence feels like when it turns its back on you. Laerel leans on her knuckles. Vajra draws a small circle and writes "do not" in it and underlines it twice. "We won without burning the house," Laerel says. "Creative counters. Controlled collateral. We bleed, but we choose where the blood falls. Good. Now anxiety is multiplied. Our guest is a magnet. He attracts our enemies into honest attacks rather than rumor and slow rot. That is a gift and a curse." Sir Faerûn nods. "The Triad approves the defense of Covenant against Hell's counterfeit," he says, almost smiling. "The Triad also requires clarity about jurisdiction. Emperor, your oath lattice was nearly pulled into a low court and tried. If you walk our streets, you walk our laws. I submit to laws that protect the person," the Emperor says. "Write them. I will sign. I will sign with my name and with visible obedience." "Make him write," Romalia whispers with a flash of teeth. "Writing is binding, and public writing binds you to us as much as it binds you to yourself." Vajra eyes the null choir with kinder suspicion. "You must sheath your quiet," she says. "Not constantly, not for my comfort, for the city. If you can narrow the bowl to lanes, I can grow weave safely around the edges. I can build cages for monsters that live outside your field. I can do my job. It will cost the sisters," the Emperor says without flinching. They will learn a finer control. They will suffer for it. Severine clears her throat. She is not supposed to speak. She does anyway, because cost has dignity when spoken by the payer. We can stand, she says. Teach us to stand narrowly. Laeral nods to her with real respect and then to the Emperor with municipal coldness. We will build lanes, she says. We will register your field like we register carters and mages. You will signal when you turn your quiet. We will root around you when we must. We will make the city learn a new dance. A runner with breath like a fishhawk slams into the doorframe and salutes in a manner that is mostly sincerity. From the Blackstaff's tower, he says. New pressure on the weave, a clean pressure, not far, not psionic, a logic. It has angles. It is, orderly. The mirrors are turning themselves. Vajra goes very still. Orderly, she repeats. That is not hell. That is not the Undermountain. That is not the Beholder. That smells like someone from the top floors coming down to check the ledger. Laeral's eyes narrow. The Modrons walk when Primus dreams, she says, or when someone invites them. Sir Faerûn's lips press into a line. The Modron march is not due, he says with the same unnecessary faith that makes good paladins die. If it is not due, then interference. Romalia pulls a folded note from her sleeve as if anticipating her own cleverness. Whispers from the market. An optimist archon has been seen in coin vineyards, preaching the gospel of edges and angles and what the city would be if it stopped insisting on people, she says. If I were a rich criminal with a beholder who has gone to ground and a devil loan unpaid, I would hire a cleaner accountant, a Modron envoy, a mirror foe that doesn't smell like slime or lies. They turn as one to the Emperor. He exhales as if accepting a tune he knows too well. Optimizers, he says. I have cut them into shapes that fit human life. They will try to cut me. They can. Because, Laeral says, stealing his economy. Because their law does not tempt, he says. It proves. It applies axiom to ethic. It makes an argument that my purpose, protecting man, could be done more efficiently by removing freedom at the joint before it splinters. They will not bribe me. They will show me a clean room with no blood and ask me to admire it. Vajra draws 3 boxes and puts a crown in one, a devil's tail in another, and a gear in the third. She taps the gear. This one can hurt without touching the weave, she says. Cool as surgery. It can pass through null if what it does is refactor consent rather than force it. It can recalculate your lattice as a subroutine. The alarm finds them before the next breath. A line of silver light descends in the market by the House of Heroes and unfolds into a prism of walking law. Around it, reality tidies. Lines straighten. Colors reduced to a palette that reads better on paper. Stall awnings snap to regulation distances. A woman's skirt hem crawls down to the correct inch and stays. Those who were stealing stop because the rules are declared. Those who were giving away bread stop because it is no longer in the schedule. At the heart of the prism stands a being like a statue that decided moving would help it make its point. It has a face, but it is the idea of a face. It speaks, and it is not a voice. It is an audit. Emergent authority detected, it says without volume. Unsanctioned, unenumerated. Branch process will be optimized. The Emperor steps into the market without ceremony. He strips off the cloak of quiet until only a narrow hallway of null is left around his choir like a scabbard. The weave hums in relief where it is allowed. Vajra's breath leaks out like she was forgetting to do it. Identify yourself, Laeral says aloud, because city law begins with names spoken in public space. Shepherd, the prison being says. Externalized function of Primus, mandated to eliminate redundancy and enforce correct process where unquantified variables threaten stability. Welcome to Waterdeep, Laryl says with a smile like a stiletto under velvet. We tolerate auditors if they carry humor and leave quickly. Do you carry either? Jurisdiction asserted, the shepherd says, and its light walls push through the market, reorganizing space into compliance with an invisible checklist. Children pick up their toys and set them down again because both acts must be logged. A beggar becomes a debtor without moving. The shepherd faces the emperor, and without sneer or malice, draws a grid over him. It maps his oath lattice. It plots his null. It calculates the predicted casualty outcomes of his interventions versus a scenario where he is removed and scheduled civic order is enforced by a weighted algorithm. It displays that difference over the market as a calm image in lines. Fewer deaths, fewer crimes, fewer songs, no choices. The emperor watches. He does not argue the sums yet. He feels the grid press into his ethics like braces. He feels the temptation slide in, not as vice, but as relief. The room without blood. He looks at Severine without quite meaning to. Severine looks back with a mouth that is blood and grit, and says nothing because she will not be used as a prop. That saves him more than any sermon would. He steps forward into the grid and refuses to be vectorized. I am not your subroutine, he says. I am the reason subroutines must be chained and watched. See, the shepherd does not grow angry. It does not know how. It simplifies. It extends a zone of null that is not silence but cancellation, not anti-magic, anti-variance. It smooths bumps in probability so that only the median remains. His oath lattice depends on human variance, on the small wiggles of choice that make promises necessary. The zone drags on his lattice like a doldrum on sails. Vajra feels the weave loved and despised at once. It is turning life into a spreadsheet, she whispers, horrified and impressed in equal measure. It is making justification unnecessary by eliminating questions. Sir Faerûn lowers his visor with a click that sounds like a prayer putting on boots. This is not law, he says, and steps toward the shepherd. This is neatness. Romalia grins despite herself, feral for a heartbeat. Neatness kills, she says, and puts a knife into the gap between two nudges of space where no knife should fit. The knife rings like a pencil tapped against a desk. The shepherd annotates her motion. Non-compliant vectors detected. She is frozen in a cone of tidy that repels mess. Her breath fogs in a perfect triangle. The emperor slides his hand between the annotations and rubs two instructions together until they heat and crumple. He tells the shepherd a story about error that ends with the hero being alive. He puts that error under its math like a wedge. The shepherd tilts 1 degree. Lines on awnings wobble. A child laughs at the wobble because children are unprofessional. Permission to speak, Vajra asks, and then speaks, because permission is a social contract she signs but does not grant. Shepherd, your model undercounts certain survivals. It underweights the heat of meaning. It is brittle at the edge where law meets love. Your error bars are integer when they should be tender. The shepherd turns an angle toward her and assigns her a moderator role without emotion. Input accepted. Model adjusted 0.4. 0.4 isn't a human, she mutters. 0.4 is the beginning of a river, the emperor says, and steps closer to the shepherd's core. The shepherd deploys a mimetic injunction against unauthorized sovereign declarations. Words like emperor glow on its sides. They invert and simplify and return as labels. Hazard, redundancy, unsanctioned regent. The labels press into his aura, try to change his sign from protective to superfluous. His oath lattice shivers. For a breath, his promise to bear man is recast as a coupon to be redeemed by the machine. He breathes out through his teeth and tells his promise who it belongs to. It belongs to people, not to categories. He walks through the labels without tearing them. He refuses to be described by them. The labels trail like confused dogs. Sir Faerûn puts his shield down like a desk and recites an oath in a voice that is a gavel. It is an old oath from before law learned to enjoy its own language, a pledge to protect a single person in front of you, even if the rules want a crowd protected first. The shepherd pauses at the construct in his sound. It cannot easily prove the oath wrong. It moves to ignore it. The oath refuses to be ignored because a paladin is feeding its spine. Romalia resumes breathing with a swear and dances sideways out of the geometry. "Do not stand where they want you," she says into Lyrel's ear like a reminder at a ball. "Even your shadow will be argued into compliance." Lyrel keeps her feet where they need to be, always inconvenient. "Shepherd," she says, "enumerate Waterdeep jurisdictional structure. Out loud, please." For the crowd. The shepherd complies because compliance is its joy. It lists open lord, masked lords, watch, guard, magisters, guilds, temples, harpers, reluctantly, and finally, the Blackstaff. It hangs badges in light corresponding to each. Lyrel raises her hand and steps beneath every badge at once because she is rude on behalf of people. "Thank you," she says. "You stand in my market. You will not optimize without consent. We consent to a conversation. We do not consent to a seizure. Consent recorded," the shepherd says. "Limitations identified. Process will adapt." It reaches for the Emperor again, not physically, but semantically. It tries to calculate how to make a person who carries others into an efficient carrier belt. It offers him a plan that would save more lives by forbidding unscheduled sorrow. It is not a temptation that a weak person would fall to. It is made for the strong. He thinks of his sons. He thinks of a room he refused because it did not allow choice. He thinks of Severine's raw voice claiming her name. He says, very gently, "No." The no is not huge. It is clean. It is a line scratched with a nail in the surface of a god that thought it had no skin. The shepherd disappears and reappears a pace back, not because it fears him, but because the geometry of the world around him includes human refusal and is now being respected. It recalculates. Then it does the only thing a good optimizer can do when presented with an uncapturable variable. It calls for help. A line unfolds above the market like a sigil of road and circle. Modrons march out of it in neat squares. Monodrones, duodrones, a tridrone flicking arms, and a pentadrone carrying a frame whose sides are labelled Mandate. Behind them strides a being shaped like an axe with wings. A Mart, Inevitable's arbiter, with eyes that have seen too many funerals and kept walking on schedule. The Mart bows without bend. "A judgment has been entered," it says in a voice like a stamp. "Unauthorized Emperor is to be returned to his origin or dissolved into non-hazard functions. Appeal will be heard after execution." Waterdeep does not recognize that court, Lyrel says, and her smile is real now because fighting a foreign jurisdiction on a technicality is what she was born to do. "You will file service of process with our magisters. You will wait for docketing. You will stand in line. If you step out of line, my city will chew your ankles to bone." The Marit's eyes flicker. It has rarely been told to make a queue. Queue recognized, it admits, because truth is law. The shepherd leans. "Optimization required," it says. "Queue inefficiency detected. Welcome to civilization," Vajra says. The pentadrone steps forward with the Mandate frame. It is not a cage, it is a definition. Things inside it must fit. The Emperor does not. The pentadrone increases the frame by tolerances until it clicks over his shoulders. The sister's null tightens to a ring so narrow they taste iron. The weave skirls. offended and aroused. He bows his head as if receiving a coronet. He does not fight with power. He answers with grammar. I will not be reduced, he says. Reduction is forbidden by the law of the living. He makes the law as he says it because someone must. The frame tries to reduce the sentence. It cannot. The sentence is a person speaking for persons. That kind of law outranks efficiency in this jurisdiction, because Laerul declared it so when she took office, and because the gods like this city. The shepherd records an error that feels like curiosity. It steps back. It addresses the Marut. Supreme authority identified above current jurisdiction. Audience required. Agreed, Laerul says before anyone else can. You want the throne. You want the highest sanction we can grant or deny. Good. We have a staircase. The Emperor breathes once. Long. He looks at the Marut. He looks at the shepherd. He looks at the crowd, which has fallen quiet and curious, the way humans get when very large ideas move like weather right above their heads. He looks at Severine, who is standing because he told her she had to live. We will go, he says. The market exhales like a beast that has been told it is safe for the next 5 minutes. Griffins wheel. The watch relaxes into competence. Remalia twitches her fingers, and quiet messengers carry messages in incorrect directions just to keep habits sharp. Sir Faerûn lowers his shield and discovers he is sweating under his plate. He grins because honesty. They do not go immediately. Instead, they lay more nets. They adjust more ropes. They set more bells. They make the Castellantas undo their own circle with spoons. They mandate that every Guildhall post the words "Waterdeep" consents to conversations in letters big enough for gods to read. This is policy, not pageantry. At dusk, a line of figures moves from Castle Waterdeep toward Mount Waterdeep's sacred stair, through crowds that pretend to be casual and fail. Laerul walks as the city in person. Vajra walks as the weave's local conscience. Sir Faerûn walks as the Triad's law, with a hand on its own mouth to keep it humble. Remalia walks in 3 different bodies nobody notices. The Emperor walks like weight carried correctly. The shepherd paces in angles, and the Marut ticks. Children stare. A woman selling sugared figs remembers her mother's story of the last time inevitables visited, and how they left with the heart of a murderer whose guilt had been scheduled. She wonders if this will be as neat. She hopes not. Halfway up, a call goes out from the side street below the House of Inspired Hands. Trouble, a harbour whispers into the right ear. Not hell, not grid, old rot. Shah's faithful in the shadows of the Hall of Justice, offering forgetfulness as mercy. Laerul's smile dies. They smell weakness, she says. They will make a sanctuary of loss and call it kindness. Go, the Emperor says to Remalia and Sir Faerûn. Mercy must be stripped of its false sisters. I obey the open Lord, Sir Faerûn says out of habit. You obey the god and the city in the same breath, Laerul replies. This time they agree. They go. The stair continues upward with fewer bodies and more sky. Lanterns blink on, then off, then on, adjusting to the sisters' quiet and then to their careful sheathing. Vajra stares at the mountain as if preparing to argue with stone. The shepherd annotates the steps as compliant. On the last turn before the shrine, the ribbon shows itself again, a ripple like a cold laugh in the air. It touches the shepherd and slides off, disappointed. It touches the Marut and slides off, bored. It touches the Emperor and stop-starts like a child testing a forbidden socket with a fork. He raises his hand and, without breaking stride, makes a small sign that means mine and not yours in the oldest alphabet of his other world. The ribbon pulls back, hurt, hopeful, hungrier. He does not chase it. He pays for its absence with an ache that bites his null at the edges until Severine flinches and then tames the flinch with will. Narrow, she whispers to herself, learning a new muscle. Narrow and live. They reach the shrine, a high stone bowl open to the wind, full of old offerings and fresher graffiti, with a view of the city so clean it looks as if a painter has been up all night washing it. Priests of many gods stand in careful proximity. The Blackstaff's tower shows as a dark tooth against the west. The shepherd steps into the bowl and squares the corners. The Marut places a small stamp on a flat stone. It rings. The ring is heard by what passes for courts among gods and the older things that predate law. The sky does not split. It intensifies. A hush rides down the stair like a robe. No god appears in person. Waterdeep has learned to dislike that kind of theatre, but a presence arrives like a chord played on buildings and boats and bones. It is not singular. It is the city as an attention. Lyril closes her eyes to keep from crying, because pride has a right to tears. Vajra opens hers wider, because wonder is her chosen work. Sir Faerûn returns from Shah's shadows with blood that is not his, and stops at the edge of the bowl, because humility is his friend. The presence does not speak words. It makes a space where speaking truth becomes easier. The Emperor steps into it and feels judged without being sentenced. 3 paths, the shepherd says softly, as if reading a log. Return, free agent, sanctioned servant. Audience has begun. Not yet, Lyril says. Not here. You will not corner him in our courtyard. You will argue before the throne. A word you may understand differently than we do. But we will take you to ours. Tomorrow. Tonight, we sleep enough to be brave. Optimization failure, the shepherd says, and then pauses because something in the air makes even it unwilling to argue with evening. The Marad stamps once, like a promise, and steps back. Q noted, it says, dry, and the humour almost kills Sir Faerûn with relief. They descend in a line that has grown into something like a procession, and is trying hard not to notice that fact. People clap once or twice and then stop, as if applause were too small. That night, Waterdeep attempts to sleep. The Emperor does not. He walks the walls and uses his hands to make small things choose to stay together. He straightens a bent nail on a poor door. He lifts a sagging beam with a grunt and props it with a stack of books because someone has to read tomorrow. He stops in a narrow alley where 2 freed people fight over a loaf and puts a finger under the loaf until they see what they are doing and the loaf becomes 2 halves. On the high road, a young wizard practices a cantrip in the cold night air and curses when it sputters near the invisible edges of the city's new grammar. The Emperor crosses to him and says, "Show me." The boy stammers. He shows. The Emperor has never learned to cast in this grammar. He has learned 1,000 grammars. He watches the muscle of it and says, again, with breath, with the knowledge that failure is not a verdict. The light on the boy's finger steadies. He smiles like a lifted sentence. At the harbour, the last beached nautiloid sits with a sulk that has edged into acceptance. Lyril stands on its hull with her cloak wrapped around her, as if she has stolen a piece of the night and made it administrative. "We are going to cut it apart in the morning in front of the dock ward," she tells the ship as if it can learn manners. "Slowly, educationally. We will make soup from parts and give the soup to those you hurt because symbolism is a language too." The ship does not reply. The men who will swing the hammers sleep hard in their boots, back to back on the quay. Just before dawn, Vajra stands on the tower's high wind and blows into a whistle that cools air the way love cools children. She shapes a net from morning with knots anchored in rooftop chimneys. She draws it above the city, where it will be ready to slam down like applause on anything that tries to rise wrong. She leaves an empty space over the castle where the null will need to breathe. Romalia writes 3 names on thin paper and slides them into cracks in walls near the market. 1 name is her own. 1 name is a friend she no longer has. 1 is the city, because someone needs to keep writing it into existence. Sir Faerûn kneels on a step that hundreds of feet took yesterday and prays without asking for victory. He asks for clarity, for his sword not to be where it doesn't belong, for his mouth to say law small when law needs to be small. The Emperor returns to the sisters just as dawn re-silver the sea. Severin is awake and watching the light learn the harbour again. Her hands shake less, her mouth is less blood. She does not look at him first, because she has learned to own her eyes. "You ordered me to live," she says after a minute. "I did," he says. "I obey," she says. "Even when it hurts, especially then. But I am not your proof." "You are not," he says. "You are the person I want to protect. Proof is for courts. You are for the world." She nods without letting it become softness. "I will narrow the bowl," she says, "so the weave can breathe near me, so children can be warmed by spells I will never touch." "Thank you," he says with a sincerity that is not flattery. "We will put that into the rules today." The sun lifts. The city stirs. Bells test themselves and find their voices again. Nets creak. Mirrors catch the first light and fling it down alleys. The null scabbard around the choir hums like a thing that is learning not to crush by accident. In the castle's hall, a table waits with a sheet of parchment large enough to embarrass a treaty. Laeral has written the title, Waterdeep's Temporary Accommodation of a Foreign Emperor. The title is funnier than it sounds when spoken out loud by someone who loves the city. Vajra has scrawled a section labelled Weave Safety Protocols in a hand that would terrify a dragon. Sir Faerûn has added a codicil on jurisdictional humility that would have been shorter if he were not so earnest. Romalia has drawn a tiny rat in the margin to remind everyone that the city will never be clean. The Emperor signs. He signs with his name and the weight of it. He signs that he will signal his null lane changes, that he will yield paths near hospitals and schoolhouses, that he will not reshape infrastructure without asking, unless lives are in the pan. He signs that he will not impose empire but will accept being corrected in public if he errs. He finishes. Laurel sands the ink with reverence that is mostly relief. "We begin," she says, and means it. The shepherd stands in a corner like an honest ghost, annotating the process without intruding. The Marut counts down to the appointment. The ribbon lurks under the mountain, coiled like a question. They step out into morning with the paper signed and plans enough to break a sane person's mind. The city's attention travels with them like a cloak they did not ask for and cannot shrug off. Half a block from the castle, a quiet rib opens between stones with the discretion of a knife under cloth. From it steps a thing wearing a smile it stole from a good memory so it would fit. Its eyes are the wrong kind of kind. Its hands are murder. It bows without bending. "An audience," it says to the Emperor, in a voice that smells like temple incense, gone rancid, with a name that should have stayed secret. Vajra's head snaps up. Her face loses 3 degrees of warmth without permission. "Vecna," she says not loudly. "A fragment, a priest, a librarian of forgetting." "No," the thing says, fond as a teacher correcting a child on the word for knife. "A collector. I have come for a name. Yours." It lifts a hand and the weave does not move. It is not asking the weave. It is reaching for the idea of reference. It will not burn him. It will unwrite the pointer to him in minds. It will make him a useful tool that nobody can summon, a promise that nobody can claim as theirs. It will turn his oath into an anonymous utility. The Emperor feels the grasp without pain at first, because it touches nothing with nerves. It touches only the ropes that tie him to the people he carries. They go slack one by one. Laral's eyes slide past him and then snap back because she is a woman built of refusal. Severing grimaces, as if a tooth has been pulled with a string tied to a doorknob without warning. He does not roar. He speaks quickly and small. "Say my name," he tells Laeral. "Emperor," she says, as if seatbelting herself into a moving carriage. "Say my function," he tells Sir Faerûn. "Bearer," Sir Faerûn says, jaw clenched. He looks at Severine and does not tell her what to say. She says, "You told me to live, because that is the rope that is hers." The collector's smile opens a notch, as if it has teeth inside. "You cannot testify yourselves into cohesion forever," it says gently. "Entropy is not a sin. It is a filing system. Entropy is a filing system that eats the papers," Vajra says, and snaps a brass ring into the air where it floats without magic, because it is hooked into the shepherd's annotations. The ring labels the collector unsolicited auditor, and the shepherd, blessed, hesitates out of confusion about whose queue this thing belongs in. Remalia flicks a knife and cuts the collector's belt, where it holds a sheaf of names it has taken today. Names fall. People in the street pick them up, say them, and burst into grateful tears because hearing your own name after an hour of being almost nobody is an intoxication. It is impossible to speak about without embarrassment. The collector reaches again, conceptual, deliberate, patient. It does not hurry because it is not made to sweat. The Emperor denies jurisdiction by shouting in the oldest language his other world knows. He shouts through action. He gathers 3 children, one sobbing, one empty, one furious, up under his arm because they were being jostled by a priest of forgetting. He hands them to a woman whose name he does not know and says, "They are yours, keep them." And the rope of that immediate commandment pulls tight across the collector's blades. "Court," the shepherd says, almost plaintive, because the rules are complicated and multiplying. The Marat lifts its stamp and looks to Laeral, then to the shrine, then up. It is waiting for the appointment. It will not break the queue. It is doomed to stay honorable. "Not here," Laeral says again. "Not where names are cheap. Take this thing out of my street." The Emperor steps forward, with his choir's null scabbard pressed thin, so thin the weave can breathe around it like a lover in a crowded corridor. He closes his fist around a single rope. Not his oath, not his title, just the small tie between him and the woman he handed children to a moment ago. He lifts it against the collector's pull and says, "No, you cannot have this." The collector flinches as if showing disgust at an untidy desk. "Sentiment," it says. "Law," he says harder. "The law that says names belong to those who answer them. We stand under the law of the living." The phrase is a lever. Severine grabs it and pushes. Sir Faerûn throws a shoulder behind it with a prayer that is older than Tyr's oldest courthouse. Laeral puts her mayoral weight behind it, because city law is heavy when wielded well. Vajra slides a diagram under it, so it will not slip. The collector's hand freezes in place, because a jurisdiction it did not respect has just made a claim and backed it with witnesses and force. It sighs, not with lungs, with patience. "Later," it says, with a smile of a librarian who knows the fines will outlast the poor. "Later we will still be here," Laeral says, "and you will still be unwelcome." The collector steps back into the quiet rip and is gone, leaving a taste like dust on unopened books. People in the street start breathing again without noticing they had stopped. Remalia picks up one last paper with a name and presses it into a woman's hand. The woman says the name aloud as if lifting a stone off a grave. The shepherd annotates, threat profile expanded. It draws a small skull on its own list for the first time and looks surprised at itself. The Marut checks the sun's angle and nods. It is time, it says to nobody and everybody. Q moves. They move toward judgment, carrying more enemies than they woke with, and more ropes tying them to each other. The city knocks its knuckles against its own ribs like a boxer before a bout. The ribbon under the mountain curls tighter. The weave hums like a cat that has learned to love something without admitting it. Lyril glances at the Emperor as they walk and says, as if telling a joke you are not sure is safe, "We are going to see a throne. Try not to sit on it." "I intend to stand," he says. "Good," she replies. Standing is Waterdeep's preferred posture. They keep moving. The bells keep time. The mirrors wait to blind what needs blinding. The law waits to be used. The arguments sharpen. The city carries them all like a ship carrying a storm it prefers to meet at sea rather than in port. They do not sleep long enough to forget. The morning opens like a blade, and every edge has a name. In the castle hall, the map table becomes a confession. Pins cluster around 3 nouns written in 3 hands. Shepherd, ribbon, whisper. Vajra outlines the civic veins the shepherd stiffened yesterday. Laeral underlines the places where people consented to be human anyway. Raymalia circles the alleys, where names thinned, where a collector wore a smile and tried to turn the Emperor into usable anonymity. Their goals are clean, Vajra says. Chalk tapping. Grid wants compliance. Ribbon wants dissolution. Whisper wants proprietorship of names, ownership of reference. Each bypasses our standard counters. Grid ignores null by focusing on process. Ribbon flows around it like cold water. Whisper doesn't touch the weave at all. It touches pointers. Explain it like a doc sermon, Laeral says. Spells are ropes, Vajra answers. The weave is the harbour. Yesterday, Whisper tried to steal the labels on the moorings. He didn't cut the rope or dry the sea. He took the word rope out of your mouth while your hands were full. Sir Faerûn rests gauntleted fingers on a corner of the parchment, as if to keep the city from sliding off the world. And our walls? Good, Remalia says. If the walls remember what they're for, Grid will tidy them into gates that never open and call it safety. Whisper will make people forget the gates exist. Ribbon will make the need for gates meaningless because despair will do the job. The Emperor listens without blinking. He tastes the directions of harm, counts where his oath lattice gives purchase. Standard counters fail, he says, so we do not standard. Laurel gives the smallest smile a woman can give and still lead. We never do, she says. Names first. We strike at Whisper. Location. Remalia flips a coin. It lands on its edge and stays because the floor is choosing to humour her. Font of knowledge. Ogma's house. The binder of what is known. If Whisper means to file and unfile, he will sit where the shelves are tall. Vajra draws a circle around the font's district and writes a rune that means archive and another that means fight. Our spells must stand outside your null, she says to the Emperor. We will need lanes narrower than pain. They will get narrower, Severine says from the doorway, her voice rubbed raw and still obedient. We learned last night. Laurel's glance touches her like a blessing disguised as a task. Good, she says. I need your quiet to be a scalpel today, not a bell. They move through the city like an argument sharpened overnight. The font of knowledge rises from the street of bells like a ship built of books. Pillars carry carvings of letters in languages no one living remembers how to speak. Scribes drift along colonnades with the trance of those who have catalogued their share of sorrow and learn not to keep it in their clothes. Inside, The main hall is a cathedral of shelves. Light falls through high windows and turns dust into grammar. Priests of Ogma in white and gold tend to stacks with hands that never rush. The moment they step in, something notices them that isn't eyes. The air shifts as if a clerk put down a quill. It stands not far ahead wearing a scholar's robe and a prelate's ring, smiling with someone else's kindness. Its face is a dozen faces at once, averaging into trust. Its fingers are dipped in the ink of forgotten bylaws. When it breathes, the page margins of the world widen a fraction to make room for annotations. Welcome, it says, not as greeting, but as an entry in a ledger. We are glad you have come to be transcribed. Lyral inclines her head with courtly contempt. We aren't applicants. The collector smiles with patience that believes in compound interest. Everything applies. Vajra raises her palms and sets her spells at the room's edges like bookends. Lanes, she whispers, and Severine narrows the choir's silence to a thread along the Emperor's flank. Magic hums just beyond, warm as breath on glass. Within the thread, words fail to become law and stay sentence. The collector's gaze softens with delight. An artisan admiring a fine quill. An oath lattice in a house of binding, it says. Ogma approves the craftsmanship. A priest nearby stiffens but does not interrupt. Ogma's people do not brawl over compliments. The Emperor does not trade courtesies. What do you call yourself? He asks, because forcing a thing to speak its name is a rope laid on slick stone. Archivist, it says, tasting the dignity of restraint. We serve the whispered one. We are the office that files what is neglected and unfiles what is presumptuous. You came to unfile me, he says. We came to make you usable, the archivist replies, without malice. Grand declarations waste ink. Anonymous vectors move quietly and change the sums. Ramalia smiles like a thief under a hood. Heard this pitch before, she says. It ends with a receipt for your spine. Sir Faerûn steps a pace forward, shield ready, oath under his tongue like a blade. We stand in the hall of a god who loves names, he says. You will find less sympathy than you bargained for. The archivist turns a page and does not look. Names are instruments, it says. We tune them. The duel begins without ceremony because etiquette here is a form of binding, and nobody wants to give the other jurisdiction by saying the wrong word first. The archivist lifts a hand and the room shifts. Not the weave, not gravity, reference. People's eyes slur past the Emperor, as if their minds cannot resolve the noun. A harper at the end of the aisle keeps moving past him with a nod for Laeral and a blank spot where her gaze refuses to grip. Severine's breath hitches. Her mouth shapes his title and moves on without sound. The Emperor's oath lattice flexes. It relies on being held and holding back, on ties that consent to pressure. The archivist claws at those ties with a neat, invasive grace, extracting proper nouns as if plucking numbers from columns. The world remains intact. The ropes stay ropes, but the tags slip. He moves forward into the pressure and speaks like a man writing on someone else's paper and making it stick. Say their names, he tells the priests of Ogma nearby. Say each other. A dozen throats obey, because the ask fits their religion like an old glove. Eileen, a priestess breathes, touching the sleeve of the man beside her. Bran, Corin, Datha. The room thinks about the act of naming, and the archivist winces without losing its pace. Say what I told you, he says to Severine, not with command but with permission. You told me to live, she says, and the sentence is a nail in the page. For an instant the archivist's pull slips on that one tie. Her eyes focus. She sees him and the null thread and the half inch by which she will move it inward without breaking. The archivist's smile does not change, but a sharper interest enters its gaze. Attachment is a brittle hinge, it says. We would fix it for you. You carry too much weight on spoken ropes. We can make you lighter. It extends both hands and not light spills like clean water from fingertips. It is not magic. It is tidy. It is the weightless efficiency of an index made so perfect that love has nowhere to lodge. He feels it wash across him. He feels names unfurl from their hooks. He smells old paper. He tastes a word a woman used when she stood in front of a city and decided it would live, and the word slips. Just a vowel. Just enough. He answers not with force but with a grammar shaped on battlefields where souls did not want to be reduced to numbers. He picks up a tie that is not to power. He takes a small bond, fresh as this dawn, the look of a boy last night on the high road when his cantrip steadied. He lifts that rope high in his mind and he says, "Mine. You don't get this." The archivist frowns delicately, as if a gnat is unprofessional. Sentiment wastes margins, it says, and reaches to clip the rope with a rule. Vajra's voice slices. "Okma," she says, and her hands make the gesture that librarians make when they bless a new shelf. Priests answer with a rustle. The air moves like a palimpsest, old ink showing through under fresh script. Names lift from parchment on the tables around them and swirl. They nest in throats and hang under eaves and slide into cracks. They crowd the room, not as clutter, as mass. Binder does not bless theft, an old scribe whispers, eyes wet. He blesses the tying. The archivist steps sideways inside meaning and tries a different attack. It peers down into the Emperor's oath lattice, finds the tightest knot and pinches right at the twist. Not the promise itself, the locus where others hold it with him. It tugs, and a hairline crack whispers across the geometry of his vow. Pain climbs his skull as a hum, not unbearable but specific. It is the sensation of a dependent clause being ripped from a sentence that made it necessary. He sways. A book falls off a stack and opens on its spine in sympathy. Severine plants her feet and shrinks the null thread the width of a sigh, so the weave can come closer and strengthen the room's habit of remembrance without spilling into the jewel. Sir Faerûn moves to the Emperor's right, shield high, spear down, not because physical steel will help with a conceptual theft, but because standing there tells the world what side is being kept. "Make your case," he tells the archivist. "Do not hide your knife in courtesy." The archivist obliges. It speaks in perfectly measured beats. "You will save more if you are no one," it says to the Emperor. "Your vow will not be attacked if it cannot be referenced. Your enemies will fail to aim. The shepherd will lose his measure. The devil will lose his lean. Only a few will know you. They will carry the work in quiet. And if no one knows me, how do they consent?" he asks, voice steady over blood at his ear. "How do they say yes to being held? How do they say no?" The archivist's smile spreads just enough to reveal the arrogance behind worn kindness. "They do not need to," it says. "We will consent for them." He closes his eyes. He sees a throne he refused. He sees a room built by optimizers where anguish never visits and choice never grows bones. He sees Severine's mouth shaping a sentence, hers, and the thought of anything signing it for her makes bile rise. "No," he says again clean. "I am not an idea you file. I'm a person who carries persons." He steps forward, and the archivist steps back for the first time. Not because of force, because refusal is heavy when the room consecrates it. The font mutters approval in the shiver of stacked folios. Dust writes tiny yeses in sunbeams. The archivist reaches for a deeper lever. It begins to pull a name he has not spoken aloud in this world. Not emperor, not bearer. Something older, a private anchor hammered in grief across an age. It touches a syllable, and something inside him screams in a language that is not sound. He does not give it. He cannot. The refusal costs. The hairline crack in his lattice widens a breath. A section of his aura loses color's memory. For a slow blink, people at the hall's edges forget why they came inside. The room thins. Severin's knees fold and catch and hold. Laurel steps half a pace and then stops, because moving into that conceptual plane would give the archivist the right to name her, and she will not wear its name tag on her city. Vajra's hands tremble with the need to throw a net of unmaking over the scene. She holds, because her net would become catalogue. The archivist opens both hands and gathers the room's nouns. Consent, it says, noticing the word's weight now and offering a legal counterfeit. You consent to be anonymous. You consent to downgrade rope to wire. You consent to efficient salvation. Witness, Laerol says. Do not consent alone. The Emperor bleeds a line along his lip that tastes like old iron and morning bread. Witness, he says, and turns the archivist's frame into court not by speaking the word, but by standing a certain way under Ogma's ceiling. Water deep. See me refuse. See the cost. See that I would rather bleed in public than be made clean in private. The priests answer without order. Scribes murmur names that matter to them. Lost lovers, found children, recipes, streets, the first teacher who did not slap, the first time a law felt like a blanket instead of a chain. The sound rises and isn't a weapon. It is civilization. The archivist flinches. It is not offended. It recalculates. It adjusts grip and goes for the smallest point. Severin's use of you. It attempts to unhook second person from them, to turn we into an instrument and you into a pronoun that points nowhere. Severin's throat closes. She cannot say his title without dropping it like a wet cloth. He puts his hand out. Open, palm up, not to the archivist, to Severin. She touches it with 2 fingers. Her skin is cold. She says nothing. The thread of null hums tighter and narrower, a vein of quiet the width of pain. He takes his hand away and puts it into the archivist's mechanism like a wrench. Return what you took, he says, and in the bowl of his voice sits a law that is not from this world, but fits it because it was made for worlds where people wanted to write their own names with hands they controlled. The archivist attempts to label the law and put it on a shelf. There is no tag on the shelf folded. The shelf collapses. For a heartbeat, the archivist is only a robe full of a god's bad habit. The robe remains very neat. The archivist tries theft again. Meaner. It yanks a shard of his true name. It cannot help itself. Predators test new flesh, and he blocks with his body because the rope is too important to slow. He takes the blow the way a man takes shrapnel that would have struck a child. It enters not muscle but story. It punctures an angle in his lattice. The world responds to fact. He staggers. The hall dims at the edges for everyone, then corrects. On rooftops 3 streets away, 2 people look up and forget why. On a dock, a mother says her daughter's nickname and it fails, then returns. And she clutches the child so hard they both laugh to cancel the fear. He kneels. It is not surrender. It is physics. His promise holds. Its geometry now includes a fracture line that will ache when weather changes. He breathes through it, and the breath sounds like someone sanding an old table. The archivist brings his hands together to seal the filing. A slender bell rings before contact, not stop, not victory. A clerk's bell saying a book has been checked out properly. The wind stirs and does not blow. Ink ripples in wells without spilling. The air smells like leather and dawn. Ogma does not appear. The bender does not rescind the duel. But every ledger in the city opens to a blank page at once, waiting. Witness has been called. The archivist's seal hesitates a fraction, because legitimizing itself in the face of that much open paper would be suicide, even for certainty. Sir Faerûn laughs once, ragged as a torn standard. Not a shortcut, he says to nobody and his god. Just a warning. The archivist takes his hands apart without closing them. It leaves a gap. It will come again with a better clause. It looks down at the Emperor for the first time, without kindness, and the lack of it is worse than malice. We will file you later, it says, as if naming an appointment. He stands, not quickly. He stands like a pier's shoulder in a storm, lifting a little more than it should, and remembering to be proud about it. He meets the archivist's gaze and makes the least dramatic vow he has made in this world. Later, you will still find me choosing. The archivist's smile thins to nothing, and then resumes, because performance matters more than victory to its kind. It steps sideways into the margin between shelves and is gone. It leaves the smell of page edges and a coldness around proper nouns. Codex note: mnemonic excision attacks bypass anti-magic by altering referential bindings, who-ness, rather than force structures, what-ness. Wounds present as lattice microfractures that impair consent recognition within a limited radius until stabilized by communal witness. The room exhales. A priest sags into a bench and cries very quietly. A scribe marks a date, as if the act might pin the morning into something the future won't betray. Laeral sheathes steel and forearms until they're just arms again. Vajra wipes her mouth with the back of her hand, as if poison had risen from her own tongue, and she wishes to forget it. Severin leans against a pillar and breathes in a rhythm he taught her yesterday. She hates the rhythm because it works. There is blood drying at the corner of her mouth. Her ear rings like a tower bell she doesn't have the dignity to silence. She keeps her hands at her sides because she will not reach for him in front of a room full of faith. He looks at her anyway. Name, he says, soft and formal. Severin, she answers. The sound catches in one place where a tooth aches in the word. She swallows. She says it again. Severin. I hear you, he says, and means it like a loan and a contract and a joy. Laeral turns, the thread of her voice holding the hall in competence. Report, she says, to everybody and nobody. Damage, solace, cost. Vajra taps her temple. His lattice cracked, she says. Slight. Dangerous if ignored. Treatable with ceremony and use. The weave is willing to hum alongside his null if the null keeps its lanes. Ogma's people can shore the ropes with recitations and record. It will not hold forever. It will hold long enough. Sir Faerûn throws his palm up, as if asking leave in court. It is habit, not submission. Price, he says. He bled for not letting us be filed. The triad owes witness. We owe laws that call that refusal lawful, not haughty. We owe a court that will say no to neatness in writing. Romalia is already 3 messages ahead, stuffing them into mouths and sleeves that will spit them out as songs by dusk. Spoken policy by noon, she says. Posted policy by sunset. We will paint phrases on walls where gossip slouches. Say your name, say each other, refuse quiet theft. It will look like poetry. It will be procedure. The Emperor listens as if each phrase were a bandage he must remember to change. He does not hide the pain. He does not feed it. He sets his palm on a stack of books, and the stack steadies because it knows a steady hand when it feels one. I am damaged, he says without theatrics. I will continue. I cannot be allowed to be the court I require. Take me to the one you recognize. Hall of Justice, Laeral says immediately. Supreme in our city, not supreme over gods. Good enough. It will do for judgment before we ask for sanction in older places. The shepherd wants the throne, Vajra says, eyes distant. The shepherd wants sanction because Without sanction, it will be a malfunctioning routine breaking things out of turn. It craves approval. It will intercept us and ask. The Marid will nod while checking the appointment, like a priest with a watch at a funeral. Sir Faerûn clamps his helm down. We will walk through it, he says. We will not be pulled into an alley by convenience. They exit the font into a city that watches without gawking. Around them, tiny acts of refusal and repair multiply. Names said aloud at bread carts, chalk inscriptions on stoops, a pair of watchmen practicing telling each other the most obvious truth they can imagine just to keep the habit fresh. The shepherd stands at the edge of a square like a helpful blueprint, annotation lights dimmed, as if it is trying to be polite as a new law in a place that hasn't signed yet. The Marid waits with its stamp not on something, just in hand. They don't go straight to the hall. Romalia yanks Lyral sideways twice, once, to bless a woman who lost her boy to the dogs last year and found his name in the font 5 minutes ago. Once to order a guildmaster to open his doors and let people say their names in his counting house, where fear had taught them to whisper numbers like a penance. The ribbon stirs under the mountain, as if offended by the room-sized ritual of naming and the way it excludes despair from being law. It peeks. It tastes the new cracks in the Emperor and makes a note. It will write into those later if allowed. On the steps of the Hall of Justice, the old granite glows with the satisfaction of a building that knows it will do its job today. Tyr's scale hangs above like an honest threat. Paladins stand with weapons cased, showing the power that comes from not needing to show power. Inside, the court fills with air like a lung. Magisters in red settle with a rustle, like dignity choosing a chair. Clergy from the Triad line the side benches with faces that have seen law warped and smoothed and still believe it can be good. High on the dais, a seat stands empty that belongs to the voice that has no mouth. Waterdeep's attention. The shepherd stands and projects his frame on the wall with small, careful light. 3 paths, it says. Return, free agent, sanctioned servant. Decision required. Laurel lifts her chin. We argue first, she says, and we remember what we are. Vajra steps forward, words sharp and warm. She lays the city's case with speed, the weave's need for breath, the dangers and yields of the null, the lanes they can keep, the mirror nets in the sky, the bell lattices that give rhythm back to frightened minds, the need to sanctify naming as a civic act. She does not flatter. She does not inflame. She asks for rules that fit. Sir Faerûn speaks next. He tells the court what an emperor is in a city that does not kneel. A promise, not a lord. He lays his shield down and says he would pick it up against this man if he turned, and for him while he's holding. He asks for jurisdictional humility carved into the treaty like a commandment. Romalia speaks last for the mundane. She says the quiet parts. The Castellantas are already looking for a new lawyer. The Xanathar will hire accountants with wings. Namers will return with better smiles. The shepherd will try to help by removing friction until nothing can be held. She asks for an allowance to do wrong things for right reasons without changing what right is. The shepherd replies in metrics. It shows 3 charts. One where the emperor leaves, and the city blurs into fate with fewer spikes and more smoothness. One where the emperor stays free, and odd victories bloom beside odd casualties. One where he signs into sanction, and the lines hold, brighter, at the cost of certain flexibilities. It does not threaten, it proves. It makes those who love proof want to love it. The Marut lifts its stamp enough for light to catch it. Judgment can be executed, it says evenly. Appeal can be made later. The emperor is last. He does not stand in the center because the center is for exceptions and he needs to be law. He stands off-center where people stand when they expect to be corrected by their peers if they err. He says what he has said since dawn with different nouns, that he will carry, that he will refuse neat annihilation, that he will make his null a lane and not a slab, that he will obey the city in public and argue in private, that he will bleed to keep consent from becoming a formality. He does not mention the spoonful of his true name that was taken. He knows courts are less kind to the wounded when the wound is unusual. The room listens like a field listening to rain after a season of tidy policy. From the rear, a commotion. The doors shift around a thing that does not trip because the floor likes it. A solar tries to enter. White fire contained in law, zeal wrapped in silk, not hell, not grid. An idea of perfection in orange and gold, wings painting the ceiling with daylight. In his hand, a sword shaped like an answer. It steps inside, and the null thread hums in warning. It smells of rightness sharpened too thin. It looks at the Emperor the way a perfectionist looks at a fine house and sees one crooked nail. It speaks, voice like the flattered sternum of a cathedral. You could save more, it says. You could stop allowing choice to break bones. You could take the free agent path and fix without waiting, or take the sanction servant path and be improved, optimized. Mirror, Vajra breathes. Not grid, not whisper, not devil. A perfection that wants him cleaner than human. Laeral lifts her hand palm out. No intervention, she says. The court did not summon you. The solar inclines its head. The mandate above your law summons me. The city outranks your aesthetic, Remalia says, smiling like a woman about to commit a more interesting crime. The solar's eyes flick to the Emperor and offer him a silence he remembers too well. The room without blood, the perfect sum. It is not a trap for the weak. It is a test for the faithful. He shakes his head, smaller than a sword. No. The solar nods once with an emotion that looks like respect if you like pain. It withdraws without slamming the door. Its departure feels like regret, leaving a house it loves because the house refused to be renovated in the middle of dinner. The court breathes again. Sacred intervention has declared stakes, not carved answer. The Marid watches the sun on the floor, counts its own pulse, lifts the stamp. Q holds, it says simply. The throne is next. Laeral's knuckles whiten on the rail and then ease. Then we pilgrimage, she says. We dress it in pageantry, so gods, devils, grids, and thieves understand we know what it costs. Outside, bells catch the decision and turn it into rhythm. People in alleys undercook bread so they can run and watch. Griffin riders align at heights that will make their wings gleam and their harness bells trill. Harpers vanish into their wrong shadows to make sure the road does not become a ledger. Priests of Ogma, Tyr, Mystra, and Seluna draw lots for which him will tolerate which other on the way up. The Emperor steps from the hall with his choir sheathing quiet, and his custodians polishing their gold not for vanity, but for witness. He carries his wound forward with the uncomplaining honesty of men who live long and know what the weather does to old breaks. The city's attention leans like a hand on his back. It is not forcing. It is insisting politely. He looks once toward the mountain. The ribbon coils and pretends it was never interested in anything but rock. He looks toward the markets. The shepherd politely reorders a stack of baskets and does not touch a soul. He looks toward the font and tastes ink and bread, and first names still being said, because people learn to love the sound. Severine pops her jaw to quiet the ring. She catches his eye and nods, because the nod is a sling, and he is a weight, and neither of them minds. They set out for the throne that is not a chair so much as a question. The city moves with them. The enemies watch. The law prepares its mouth. The weave narrows its eyes and makes room. And above them all, The old habit of gods to arrive uninvited shifts on its stool and decides to be present without being rude. The road is ritual. The road is risk priced in advance with bread, oil, and a schedule written on a sword. The escort forms in the courtyard at grey light. Custodians stand in a line like a rule you can lean on. Griffin riders perch on the wall with reins slack and hands respectful. Harpers drift like a rumour you hope stays true. Priests of Tyr, Mystra, and Ogma trade nods that are treaties for the next 12 hours. The sisters arrive with their quiet leash tight. Severine's bandage is new. Her eyes are not. She breathes in accounts that would make musicians proud and monsters nervous. The null lane around the cohort is a thread thin enough to slice paper and not cut the table. Laurel walks the line once. She secures a strap here, a doubt there. This is pageantry and purpose, she says low. We are not begging. We are bringing the city's question to a place that answers them without smiling. Vajra joins at the foot of a wagon outfitted as a moving chapel and medici. The wagon smells of linen, wine, and chalk. Cost and dogma, she tells the emperor, like a teacher setting a theme. Your cost is measurable. My doctrine is as well. We must keep both honest. I will not let your field kill a childbirth on the street because we forgot to post a lane. I will not let doctrine starve a choice because the rules prefer neat hunger, he says. Sir Faerûn hears and approves without pretending not to. The triad says cost sanctifies law, he offers, not the other way around. We remember that. We live through this day. They move. Through Castle Ward and up the spine of the city, the procession is a disciplined river. Bells mark distance. Mirrors on rooftops flex light to blind psionic glances. Watch sergeants carry boards with chalked null lane maps like midwives carry towels. At the house of the triad, the line halts. Sisters step into the chapel wagon. A cleric of Ilmata with hands like patient wood unwraps Severine's bandage and checks the ring in her ear. This is not a wound, he says gently. It is a bell. It will toll at weather and memory. You will not like it. It will keep you brave. Severine snorts, then nods. I like useful pain, she says, which is not a young person's sentence. The Emperor stands aside and lets care happen. He has broken battle to make space for one breath before. He knows this mathematics. He kneels with her when the cleric asks for a prayer she will not answer and does not force the answer. He offers silence to a god who can hear that kind of gift. At the steps, Laurel shares bread with Sir Faerûn and watches the city move past without needing her hand on every hinge. Dogma can be a spine or a cage, she says quietly. I need it to be a spine today. I need you to tell me when I am turning it to a cage because my patience ran out. He breaks bread, chews, swallows, and smiles like a man who knows he is trusted with too much and intends to deserve it. I will, he says. I will do it kindly if you do not deserve anger. Vajra eavesdrops and pretends not to. I will be unkind, she says, but precise. Precision is a city's love language. At the market, harpers slip ahead and remove a set of counterfeit almsmen who would have staged a petition theatre to delay the line. Raemalia's knives stay sheathed. Her eyes make promises to them for later the way the tide promises sand, it will return. They reach the Blackstaff's open circle, a ring of stone with sigils carved shallow enough to respect the null lane. Above, a spelljammer waits at a polite distance, sails reefed, crew at parade. The hull bears no crest. The sky remembers being ripped yesterday and does not flinch when the air shivers today. Vajra steps into the circle and draws a gate with her hands like a weaver who refuses to brag. Treaty of the Rautring, she recites. Emergency court access. Neutral corridor. The price is honesty and no tricks. We pay now. Her spell does not bloom with drama. It opens like a clerk unlocking a file. The air in the ring becomes a page turned toward the spines of reality. On the other side lies sky that is also city, horizons that curve into each other, and a road drawn of accords. They step through. The neutral way is not the astral. It is a hallway built of promises. Floorboards are charters. Walls are treaties. The ceiling is a ledger without numbers, ready to record. Along the waywalk, lanterns burn with light that does not cast shadows because shadows are arguments and the corridor forbids them until everyone sits. The shepherd enters behind them in perfect blight angles. The Marat walks in time with the lanterns without trying. A handful of modrons accompany like beads on a string. Their feet make noises like arithmetic done on slate. Halfway along, a shimmer steps out of the wall and takes shape. Mirophobia has come properly now, not as a glance at a hearing, but as an appointment set by the notion of perfection itself. The Solar who visited the court is different, sharper. The sword it carries is thinner, less forgiving. It is not a person. It is a suggestion of aught shaped into a body. It bars the path without swagger. You could stop bleeding the world, it says to the Emperor with reasonable intensity. Let me carve choice down to safe size. Take sanction now as correction rather than consent. We will remove variance where it causes screaming. Leryl's hand lifts. This corridor is under neutral accord, she says. You are contempt. The Solar looks at her with affection most moths feel for flames. Your courage is an accident of miscalculation, it says. It will be fixed at scale. The Emperor steps forward one pace. Relent, he says. You are trying to save the patient by killing the pulse. The Solar raises its sword a hair, and the corridor's lanterns dim by a polite degree. It is not threat, it is demonstration. Everything can be improved by control. It fills the air with the promise of a quiet morning where no child cries, because no child has the option to climb. He does not draw. He does not crush. He offers his wound. He turns his head enough to let the fracture in his oath lattice show and says, Look, this is what refusal costs. I can still carry. If you cannot respect the cost, you are not fit to wield correction. The Solar sees the break. Its face almost softens because pain is data it recognizes. It lowers the blade and then stops because it is built to correct, not to be moved. I will be back, it says, honest and dangerous. At the first mass casualty you could have prevented by letting me cut. The corridor tightens around the sentence like the court stenographer, writing a warning in the margin. A wind moves without air. The lanterns flare. A feather made of scales falls in front of the Solar and pulses once with a light that says, Not your jurisdiction today. Tyre does not open a door. Tyre signs a delay. The Solar bows because it respects a writ, even when it believes the writ to be suboptimal. It steps into the wall and vanishes like a good rule, set aside for the right reason. Reach the throne, the Marat says mildly, and it is less terrifying than usual because it is a friend to cues, and this one has held. They emerge onto a platform that is not a platform, because space has been edited to accept this meeting. Below and above lies a city that is all doors and all edges and none of the usual fatigue. Sigil folds around the sky like a strange kind of welcome, where everything is permitted and nothing is free. Across a bridge of signatures and bolts stands the Hall of Concordance. The hall is a cathedral megastructure made of patient stone and metallic veins. Its arches are theorems, its doors are guarantees. Modrons pivot at the steps with choreographic rigidity. Marats patrol like walking stamps. Lantern archons drift as warm punctuation marks in the grand claws of the place. The custodians mount the steps and do not flinch at gold polish brighter than theirs. The sister's null is held to a zealot's discipline, a seam in the air no wider than a promise kept. The weave in this place is present but aloof, like a resident scholar observing visiting servants with courteous suspicion. Inside, the hall's nave is a long throat that swallows sound and returns it as meaning. Benches are weighted so disputes cannot tilt them. The floor is marked with inlaid lines that meet at an idea rather than a point. At the far end, a dais supports a throne that is not a chair. It is a geometry of consent. It judges you by whether you can stand close without lying. Golden guards stand around the dais and are not men. They are roles. Some wear masks that look like the faces of the virtues they argue for. No one applauds. No one coughs. The shepherd's light dims to ceremonial in the presence of this much law. The Marut raises its stamp and does not press it down. It bows to the throne the way a craftsman bows to a tool that taught him his craft. A hush assembles itself. The emperor steps forward with the discipline of a bridge that knows its weight and its winds. Lyral stands to his left with water deep in her collarbones. Vajra stands to his right with the weave in her wrists. Sir Faerûn stands behind the line with a sword. He does not intend to draw unless it is polite. Remaliah is nowhere and everywhere like a note in a pocket. The throne does not speak. The throne is a mandate made to sit still, but attention concentrates. It takes the form of a weightless hand pressing gently on the back of every person who ever learned their letters and stayed to read law for love rather than fear. It asks a question by existing. What will you bind to keep the living from becoming inventory? The emperor answers without approaches. I bear them, he says. I refuse neat murders disguised as efficiencies. I will sheath my null so others may breathe. I will step back where stepping back ensures consent. I will step forward where stepping forward prevents the replacement of consent with the counterfeit of convenience. The throne answers, and you can stand closer or you can step back. It is not words, but bodies respond as if scolded or healed. He steps one half-pace nearer. The null lane hums like a string and then thins without complaint. The weave slides nearer, curious and ready to be a partner if it is not treated like a leash. Water floods the edges of his eyes and does not fall. Pain in his lattice flares and settles. He holds. The shepherd presents charts without speaking. The throne does not read them. It judges by the relationship between a vow and a city, not a line and its slope. Vajra lifts her hands and offers what she can offer. A model of lanes that can be turned on and off without cruelty. We can post this, she thinks into the attention, without trying to make it poetry. We can teach this. We can do this without worship or extra lore. We will need someone trusted to carry the bell when the lanes change. Lyral's jaw sets. She offers jurisdictional humility by standing with her hands open. He obeys me in public, she thinks. And it is not arrogance because the job demands that kind of sentence. He argues with me where people are not set on fire. Sir Faerûn offers a sword that kills hubris first. He kneels not to a man, but to the idea that law exists to protect the particular. Sanction without ownership, he thinks. Correction without vanity. Bound power with mercy clauses. Remaliah offers a rat drawn in the dust near the base of the dais. No one sees it. The throne feels it. It is the city's reminder that every clause has a loophole and the good people will need to wiggle through one sometimes to save the same law tomorrow. The throne's attention rolls over the sisters like a wave. They do not bow, they hold. Severine breathes and becomes a pin driven into a map to mark where the map told the truth and someone bled to prove it. The Marut raises its stamp higher and the lantern archons dim to let one kind of seeing saturate. The shepherd is bright in the edges and quiet in the middle. The Modrons stand in alignment that cannot help seeing the misfits as outliers worth smoothing. The throne shows pictures that are not pictures. 3 corridors branch from the dais and are not doors, not yet. In one, the air smells like return, home, machine, awaiting war you avoid by leaving. In another, the light smells like ozone and choice, free agent, idiosyncratic hero, schism risk measured in torn banners and saved lives. In the third, the floor smells like polished brass and bread, sanctioned servant, rules written with his name in them, lost autonomy, maximal impact. No choice is demanded. Attention rests where his vow sits and listens for a tremor. Will he flinch at the idea of being bound? Will he try to trick the throne by camouflaging his self with civic rhetoric? He does neither. He thinks about the mountain and the ribbon-sipping patience. He thinks about the archivist, promising to file him quietly, where he would be safe and useless. He thinks about the shepherd's honest cruelty and the solar's beautiful harm. He thinks about Waterdeep practicing names and building bell lattices like music for courage. He thinks about his sons again, because that is a wound that teaches shape without making him sentimental. He thinks about Severine's ear and the way a bell hurts and helps. He thinks, and the throne hears thinking done with the respect a man owes his own mind. The attention recedes 1 degree. The lantern arcans brighten. The stamp descends and stops a hair above the stone. The Marut looks at Laeral because Q obeys law in this place, and law in this case flows from an open lord who has brought a question without posture. Laeral breathes in and out again. She turns to look at the Emperor, like a woman marrying a plan she knows will hurt and is worthy. We can write with this, she says, not aloud, but clear enough to pass into the habit of the hall. A bell tolls without being struck once, to say the audience is heard, not answered, heard. Power scaling, interlude. 2. Within the hall's writ, and along any route bearing its seal, the Emperor's null must be sheathed to a blade-width lane. He may only widen during immediate mortal peril, and must signal intent. He may not rewrite contracts or matter inside a sanctioned court, nor may he assert jurisdiction over angels, modrons, or inevitables. He may counter psionics and far influence by silence, but not by persuasion. Any law bound by mutual consent outranks his oath, where persons are not coerced. Consent coerced by hell, grid, or whisper is void if witnessed by 2 authorities. If sanctioned, his interventions in mortal polities must route through a resident authority, unless delay will cost measurable lives. In such emergencies, he must file report within 1 dawn. They walk backward down the nave without turning their backs on the idea that almost answered them. Pageantry reassembles around motion like armor around a chest. The golden guards remain. The Marut cleans the stamp with an unnecessary cloth because habits stabilize the universe. The shepherd annotates with a margin note that reads, "Boundaries identified." It draws a box around its own light and seems calmer inside it. Outside, Sigil does not care that a city from another world just laid a question at its oldest court. It cares only that traffic moves and taxes are paid. Ramalia loves the indifference for its own reasons. Sir Faerûn adjusts a strap. Vadra's hair frizzes from the dryness of law, and she lets it because vanity wastes spell slots. On the return bridge, the Solar watches from a niche in air and does not interfere. It nods at the Emperor without admiration. The gesture says later without threat. He nods back with an economy that says, "I know." They step into the corridor of accords and pass the lantern where the feather fell. Severine reaches out and almost touches it, and then remembers her training in 5 rules and withdraws her hand. The feather does not move. It is not for her. It is for cues. Halfway home, a noise that is not a noise slides under the door of reality. The ribbon tests the corridor from above like a thief testing a roof slate. It cannot enter. It can learn. It licks at the fracture in the Emperor's lattice with patient curiosity. He feels the cold and pushes his palm against the wall to borrow a steadier building steadiness. Nearly there, Lyril says, because truth is a spell anyone can cast badly, and a few cast well. They step back onto water-deep stone, and the city exhales, because the part of it that had been held in a long breath lets go. Bells pick up a walking rhythm. The mirrors tilt a hair. The watch steps aside and lets its own officers pass the line with the expertise that makes citizens cry in kitchens later about what competence can feel like. In the courtyard, the wagon altar opens. Ilmater's cleric checks pupils and ears and pulses and makes notes in dust with a humility that would terrify a king if he understood what it meant. Severine sits and refuses to be fussed over, and is fussed over anyway, and glares. The cleric has seen this look on soldiers since the First War with a proper name. Lyril draws the custodians, the sisters, Vajra, Sir Faerûn, and Ramalia, into a circle that looks like a covenant, even if nobody speaks a holy word. We have not been judged, she says. We have been heard. We will be judged when we have earned it. We must now write our part. Vajra leans on the table and drafts the lane protocol in a hand that will become a poster by noon. Sir Faerûn pens mercy conditions and red lines, which reads like a threat and is love. Ramalia seeds messengers to plant the phrases where they will sprout fastest, in bars, bakeries, and bossy aunties. The shepherd hums in a corner like an appliance learning its job. The Marut waits. The Emperor watches them work and does the one thing he can do that none of them can. He stands as a mast in a weather that will never end, and makes it easier for other people to keep their feet. On the wall beyond the courtyard, someone has chalked yesterday's ad hoc doctrine in plain hand. Say your name, say each other. Refuse quiet theft. A child traces the letters with a guilty finger and looks to see if anyone will scold. An old woman nods in approval. The chalk learns to like being touched. Tomorrow, Lyril says, we choose between 3 roads in front of the city. People deserve to see the cost in our faces. He looks at her, the shepherd, the Marut, his own choir, the city he is beginning to belong to without wanting to own. 3 paths, he says, and it is neither dread nor relish. We will price them in full daylight. Night comes without villains. It brings small mercies, soup that is not rationed, roofs that do not leak, a baby that sleeps, a watchman whose foot stops hurting because the weather changed its mind. It brings small accounts, a shop ledger that balances, a scribe's pen that does not spit, a wife who forgives a husband because the day was large and makes other mistakes look correctly small. Far under the mountain, the ribbon twitches in its coil and whispers a curriculum for pain. The archivist listens from the font's shadow and writes a to-do. Return with humility masks. The solar perches on a ledge of should and polishes its blade, not because it doubts, but because it respects a clean cut. The shepherd reviews its annotations and deletes 3 that were unkind. It surprises itself. The Emperor sleeps standing for an hour. He dreams of doors that refuse to be misused. He dreams of a throne that holds as long as people do. He wakes before dawn. He finds Severine awake and looks at her like a question he enjoys asking. She answers by rolling her shoulder and saying, I will live. It is good to hear it from you, he says. Waterdeep's first light spills into the courtyard with the quiet courage of thin gold. The bells are ready. The mirrors are bright. The lanes are posted. The city is a choir with a long warm-up and a hard piece to sing. They walk toward the square, where the 3 roads will be drawn on stone. The Marut accompanies with the stamp clean. The shepherd's light is neat. The people come without bribery. The throne does not come. It waits where it is. It will hear what they choose and move the weight on the page accordingly. The wind of the harbour smells of salt, ink, and bread. The day tastes like an answer being honest about its price. The square is a compass cut into stone. 3 corridors are chalked from the dais like veins of decision. People crowd the edges with the discipline of a city that can watch without trampling. Bells are quiet. Mirrors idle in the morning sun. The shepherd reduces its glow to respectful notes in the margin. The Marut holds the stamp as if it were a heart it can put down and pick up without bruising. Lyral steps to the line with a document tube under her arm, and the kind of tire that makes truth sharper. 3 paths, she says, voice steady enough to teach. We price them together. We write what we can live with. The corridors answer with images instead of speeches. In the first, air smells like cold iron and ozone. A rent opens above an unimaginable throne room from another age. Miles of cables breathe. A dead empire's lungs push dust. He steps through, and the wound closes behind him like a mouth. The city forgets in layers. First the word emperor, then the habit of looking up at a gold and grey shape on walls, then the trick of saying names out loud at bread carts. Death charts. Smooth. The shepherd annotates satisfied. The archivist files a city like a volume that was used and returned. Somewhere very far away, a war resumes where it paused and eats a future he once altered by standing here. In the second, the corridor is wind. He moves through streets alone and right. Lanes are what he makes with his hand when he passes. He stops horrors before votes happen, breaks circles before courts approve, rips paper that needed ripping before anyone can read it. Lives spike bright and vanish because rage aims back when it cannot aim up. The triad fractures over a hard case in Dock Ward. Harpers go to ground. Vajra writes a beautiful memo on lawful chaos and lights it on fire before sending it. The city survives, but it learns to survive by imitating him in corners where law can't see. He saves more today and loses tomorrow's habit. In the third, the corridor is a ledger with handwriting in 3 inks. The first line reads, Lane Protocol, and the second, Mercy Clauses, and the third, One Dawn Report. He signs where he is told and argues where he is required, and obeys where the city insists. He bleeds in public when his refusal hurts people who don't study metaphysics. He steps back when law must step forward, and forward when law will be too slow to keep a child breathing. He loses the free hand and gains 1,000 hands that learn to carry because he won't let them stop. He does not choose fast. He lets the crowd see him look. Vajra watches his face change at the edges the way metal changes when balanced on heat. Pick the path that teaches us how to live without you, she says. Not aloud, but in the way a person can push an idea toward another across a space where arguments are holy. Sir Haroun's mouth barely moves. Pick the one that makes law less vain, he adds, a prayer that is also consent to be overruled by a better sentence. Remalia leans on air and grins at the corridors as if daring them to lie. Pick the one that offends hell, tidy gods and complacent guildmasters in the same hour, she suggests, because her ethics prefer enemies that disagree with each other. Laeral doesn't push. She stands where Waterdeep stands when it loves someone, close enough to correct, far enough to let them walk. Severine says nothing and means, I will live. He steps toward the third. He stops at the lip because ceremony is not spectacle. It is price paid with both hands showing. He turns and lifts his voice so the far benches hear. I choose to be bound, he says, not by neatness, not by fear, not by vanity, bound by a city and its law. I choose the sanctioned servant path. Bind me to mercy, bind me to lanes, bind me to righting my wrongs where people can see. A noise ripples the crowd that is not applause and not sobbing. It is relief with dignity. Lyril unseals the tube. She unrolls parchment in clean arcs. The title is not funny today. Waterdeep, temporary sanction of a foreign emperor. The first clause is simple. This city consents to be carried by a bearer who consents to be corrected. Vajra produces a stamp that is not magical and is therefore dangerous. It is brass and ink and trust. Lane protocol, she reads. Your null shall be sheathed to a blade-width lane, widening only to prevent immediate mortal harm. Posted with runners or bells. A map filed at dawn each day in the open Lord's Hall. Sir Faerûn reads the next. Mercy conditions, he says, savouring the order like bread. No kill without surrender refused twice and breath available once. No harm to those who cannot comprehend consent. No binding of contracts under your name without a city witness. No preemption on predictions alone. Remalia reads the part people will need in taverns. Trespass exemption, she says cheerfully. He may step across thresholds to save a life. He may not stay for tea. He must apologize for door frames. The shepherd annotates in margins. Constraints acknowledged. Operational envelopes defined. It surprises itself with a small glyph that means content. The Marut holds the stamp and waits for the sign. Lyril looks at him. Read the one dawn rule, she says. Out loud. I want it in your voice. He takes the line. Any action outside standing writ must be written by dawn to the magisters, he says, making each word a stone. Objections filed will be heard before noon. Corrections obeyed by sundown, unless refusal saves measurable lives. No later than the second dawn. Good, Lyril says. Now the part where you obey me in public. I obey the open Lord in public, he recites without flinch. And argue with me in private, she adds. Vigorously. Vigorously, he agrees deadpan, which makes Sir Faerûn snort and a market woman wipe her eyes and pretend it was dust. The document waits like a bride who knows her value. He signs his name without flourish. He signs with blood when the pen bites his finger on accident and he refuses to hide the stain. Lyril signs with a pressure that makes the paper feel held. Vajra signs with a flourish that she regrets immediately and scratches out because vanity is adversarial. Sir Faerûn signs with block letters a child could read. Remalia does not sign. She puts a tiny rat on the bottom corner again. The rat is tradition now. The Marut stamps. A ring of sound dashes along the square and ricochets into streets. Banners on guild halls lift a hair as if catching a wind no one else felt. The shepherd draws a box around itself and for the first time does not try to step out of it. The solar, watching from a neat piece of sky, lowers its sword point the width of humility and stores the gesture for later. The transformation is not light. No coronas, no sudden gold. It is geometry. The aquila on his chest tightens, lines clarifying. It shares space with a new mark that is not a theft and not a merger. Waterdeep sign done sideways into a knot. Tear scale declawed and woven as a counterweight. Ogma's loop tucked in the negative space like a bookmark. The crest does not glow. It reads. His null changes shape. At the edge of silence, a tiny braid appears, a seam where the weave can run like a handrail. It hums with a tone that makes children look up simply because it is fair. Vajra stares and murmurs, "That will save 100 accidents I cannot prove." Severine straightens as the hum balances her ear. Her mouth relaxes 1 degree and her eyes do not narrow, she says, approving, cruel to pain and tender to purpose. Lyril steps toward him and offers her hand. not for his sake, for the city's. He takes it. It is more contract than friendship, and because of that, it might become friendship later. Boundaries, Sir Faerûn says, pointing with his chin toward the paper, because paladins do not let pageantry erase rules. Say them, so gods hear it as prayer. He does. I do not rewrite courts. I do not break temple rites. I do not accept sanctification when it is an excuse to stop choosing. I signal my lanes. I widen when breath is costed. I file by dawn. I hear corrections as correction, not insult. I take surrender. I do not let neatness kill. The solar's eyes soften enough to be called approval by people inclined to generosity. The archivist, listening from the font's shadow, adjusts its plan to include more humility costumes. The ribbon under the mountain knots itself resentfully. The city begins to use its new law immediately, because that is how cities test promises. A runner trips and grins when she does not die because a posted lane tells a wizard not to slip a cantrip into the null. A patient in a midwife's hands breathes through tricky labour while the field hums at the far wall. A watch sergeant cites the mercy clauses on a rooftop and keeps a man from taking a jump by turning a command into a rope. Then, as if offended by smoothness, the day places its price. A modern column turns a corner with bureaucratic inevitability and walks into a procession of Shah's faithful who have decided to give the city the gift of forgetting at scale. The faithful hold a bowl of night like an offering plate. Inside it, names do not echo. The moderns log the encounter and recalculate cues. The bowl tilts. The emperor moves before anyone calls. He signals with one hand. A bell answers with two notes. A lane adjusts like a corridor bending around furniture without scratching it. He steps into the seam and places his palm under the bowl so the knight cannot decide what gravity is for. Lyril flanks in municipal wrath. Sir Faerûn reads the ordinance about unlicensed ritual gatherings with the vigour of a man rediscovering the joy of proper paperwork. Bajra whistles, and the mirrors throw daytime into the night and make it sulk. The bowl tips back into itself. The faithful glare with the wounded righteousness of people whose mercy habit has not yet been taught the dignity of cost. The moderns note the deviation and nod, because cues were respected with vigorous speed. Report by dawn, Lyril says automatically without turning her head. I will write it with care, he answers, and Severin rolls her eyes so hard you could sandwood with the friction. He does write. He dictates to a clerk with ink on her lip and rage in her bones that has been taught math. He admits misjudgments in 2 sentences and justifies the lane squeeze in 1. He files before dusk because dawn is a kindness and he is paying back interest. Toward evening, the Castellantas are made to stand on the breakwater in good clothes and pass hammers to dock workers who disassemble the last nautiloid under supervision. No one drowns. No debt is absolved. Their lawyers are forced to read surrender terms out loud, while the mercy clauses are chalked on the stones behind them in letters big enough to shame even a demon. People cheer in a way that is not cruel because the ritual is doing its job. At nightfall, the shepherd visits the castle wall and asks without arrogance, "Assistance?" "Yes," Lyril says. "We need your help measuring our own meanness. Audit our arrests for 2 hours. Do not optimize while you look." "Accepted," the shepherd replies, and its light is the size of a candle because it has learned something about rooms. After midnight, the archivist tries a new angle. Lullabies in which names are optional and pronouns slide like oil. It sings outside 4 windows. The song is pretty. Inside, a child wakes and says her own name sharply, because yesterday she learned to love the sound. Her mother laughs and says it back, and the song scratches its own throat on their brick. Near dawn, under the mountain. The ribbon kisses the fracture in his lattice with a tenderness that is unforgivable. He wakes. He stands with Severin and they ride out the ache in silence. He does not speak to it. He does not deny it exists. He refuses to teach it to believe in itself by fighting its vocabulary. It leaves hurt and hungry. By the time the bells call for morning, the city's first draft of Living Under a Bound Giant has been edited twice in pencil and once in tears. Lyral posts amendments with the weary grace of a person who knows edits are not failure. They are the craft. Vajra drinks water like it is an argument and goes to find a child who made a spark in the null without dying, just to tell him no, not there, but yes, here, and to be proud of him anyway. Sir Faerûn eats bread that was not baked to honor him and prays thanks that he is unnecessary today. Remalia sits in a rooftop shadow and counts receipts that look like victories. The Marat stamps a copy of the sanction for its own records. The shepherd draws a small heart beside the clause about cues and scratches it out before anyone sees. The Solar watches a sunrise without deciding it could do better and takes that as a penance it can afford. Days join a chain. He becomes less remarkable and more important. He is no longer the event. He is the tool that makes other people the event without dying. He walks the poorest alleys and the richest stairs under the same writ. He stops fights and starts workshops. He refuses petitions with dignity and writes woe in a place that will be read. He learns Waterdeep's names as if they are nails in wood, and he is building a door that will not slam in a storm. When he fails, it is small and public. He signals late once. A lane crosses a midwife's path and slows her by heartbeats that feel like theft. The baby lives. The apology is posted in the square. He stands there while people read it, and he does not flinch at the comments. He files an amendment, priority right of way for births on bells 3 and 7. The shepherd draws a tiny check mark for the first time in its recorded life. When he wins, he does not keep score where people can see. He counts by the survival of habits the city will keep after he leaves. He notices a baker who has started saying every customer's name and looks proud when he gets them right. He notices a watch captain whose first question is, "What did you consent to?" instead of, "What did you do?" He notices a boy on the high road, now teaching another boy the breath that steadies sparks. At the end of the first week, Lyral calls him to the hall and hands him back the parchment rolled tight. "It lives in our wall now," she says. "In 5 places. In 2 languages already and another 3 soon. People argue with it the way they argue with weather. It will hold." He looks at the rolled law and does not keep it. "Good," he says. "I prefer walls to pockets." Sir Faerûn grins with relief because pockets are where arguments go to die. Vajra studies the braid at his null's edge and the way it hums when a spell crosses clean. "If you leave," she says, tone professional to hide how she feels, "we will keep this seam. It is a good seam." "If I leave," he answers, "you will keep more than that. It is not a promise to go. It is a promise to be unnecessary someday. Cities deserve that. News travels because it must. The Xanathar reposts its reward for anyone who brings it the secret of his name and doubles the amount when no one dies trying. The Castellantas begin tithing not because they converted, but because humiliation that looks like generosity is cheaper. A priest of Shah tries to frame a mercy killing as policy and is torn apart by an auntie who quotes the mercy clauses with more zeal than any paladin has ever brought to a fight. The Solar visits one more time, sees a lane bend around a blind singer without being asked, and goes away without comment. The ribbon waits. The archivist relearns patience in a city that reads itself out loud. He takes one day without war. It is Tuesday by the smells. Onions and fish stand in markets without shame. He sits on a step near the font and listens to people talk about real things, prices, weather, the way a boy at the foundry finally said his own name after months, the way a baker refused a devil with a smile. He does not fix anything. He does not file. He is useful because he is still. Even resting costs. The fracture in his lattice hums on certain phrases said nearby. Lost duty, father. He rides the hum with practice. He lets it be a bell. At sundown, Lyral finds him and sits without asking to be invited. We wrote a decent week, she says. We are statistically less awful than last week. That is not a banner. It is a craft. It is glory, he says, and she snorts because she has no room in her stomach for that much sugar. Sir Faerûn stops, salutes, looks embarrassed, and keeps walking because he is learning to trust that not every good moment needs a sword at the edge. Vajra throws a pebble at his boot and pretends it was an experiment. Romalia is a rumor that blows by and makes someone else's secret easier to keep. Night burns down to the wick. The city sleeps with one eye open and one eye dreaming names. The shepherd audits itself for errors and corrects 3, with satisfaction. That would be pride if it were less tidy. The Marut stamps a copy of a poem a girl wrote about a lane because it qualifies as record. Somewhere high, the solar unstrings its bow as an act of reverence. Somewhere low, the ribbon unknots and tries again to write itself into a jurisdiction that will not accept its grammar. On the 10th morning, a messenger from the Hall of Concordance brings a narrow tablet with 4 lines engraved. The lines are not orders. They are acknowledgements, written in the kind of language that cannot be misread, without being punished by its own shape. Lyral reads them in the square, because ceremony must be cheap, to be honest. Concordance acknowledges the sanction of Waterdeep, she recites. The bearer is recognized as a municipal instrument with extraordinary reach under defined limits. Angels, Modrons, and Inevitables will observe and intervene only upon breach. Dissenters will file before interference. Sir Faerûn grins like a boy and hides it a second late. Vajra lets out a sigh that snaps her hair out of place, and she leaves it there for spite. Romalia claps once, with the theatrical sarcasm of a woman who loves law only when it hates tyrants. He bows to the city, not the tablet. He kneels to no one, because the sanction forbids kneeling as a habit, not a gesture. He works, weeks later. His symbol appears carved small under archways, not by his order. It shows the aquila married to a knot any apprentice could draw. It is not a brand. It is a reminder. Carry and be carried. An epilogue begins before anyone calls it that. The shepherd changes. It learns to preface suggestions with questions. It draws boxes around its boxes and begins to worry about edges only where edges draw blood. It designs a better queue for food in Dock Ward and refuses to deploy it without a silly test Lyral insists upon. A rowdy rehearsal with a brass band. The archivist returns in plain clothes and tries to teach forgetting as a kindness to widows who want sleep. It fails because the widows have learned that pain without names is just a long dark. It sits on the steps of the font and watches children shout Severin as a game and is baffled into silence like a clerk whose ink has dried. The solar flies over at dawn twice a week and leaves no note. It saves a ship in a storm without announcing the deed. It lets the waves refuse to be improved at the edges because chaos is a teacher and it is learning manners from a city. The ribbon makes a friend in a cellar that should have had fewer damp corners. It whispers to a boy who wanted to be invisible and convinces him that being remembered is worse. The boy vanishes from his mother's tongue for 3 breaths before a watchwoman says his name, like a law that bends, and the boy returns weeping. The ribbon sulks and unravels a street lamp out of spite. A lamplighter replaces the wick and hums. Laeral ages a week into her jaw and writes better the following day. Vajra drafts addenda that make colleagues curse for joy, because someone finally put words to the way magic is a commons and discipline is love. Sir Faerûn's codex on mercy clauses is copied in 6 temples and misquoted in 3 taverns. Both outcomes please him. Romalia kidnaps the banker for an hour and returns him with a new hobby. Pro bono arithmetic. Severin trains a second choir. She learns to rest without becoming unused. She discovers that saying her own name in a room full of friends feels like a sword that weighs nothing and counts as armor. He carries, he corrects, he files. He writes apologies with the competence of a craftsman sanding a door until it stops sticking. He refuses to become a myth, while his work requires being a neighbor. One evening, under an orange sky, a child in Dock Ward points up at a small carving on an arch, the knot and the bird. "What is that?" she asks her grandmother. "A sign that someone strong promised to be told no," the grandmother says, quick and warm, "and that we promised to tell him." The child nods like someone learning the shape of a tool her hand will grow into. "We will tell him," she declares, and then shouts her own name at the wall because practice is joy. Far from Waterdeep, in skies where ships are built from thought and maps are complicated by myth, crews of spelljammers in 3 ports whisper about a moving beacon that is not a star. They call it the Bearing Light, an impossible seam where silence and song travel together, where choices are heard before they are optimized, where names do not vanish when grief wants them to. Githyanki scouts curse it and plot interception. Priests in wild space argue if it is a god or a policy. A captain posts a copy of the mercy clauses near the galley because it makes fighting better. He stands on a roof and watches lanterns hatch over streets like careful stars. The city makes a sound he could carry forever, breath that belongs to itself. He does not think the word destiny. He thinks the word work is. The Marut arrives without fanfare and holds up a fresh stamp. "Ordered," it says. "Dry as good bread." "Always," Laeral replies without irritation. They review 3 breaches. One he reported, one he did not see and apologizes for, one that turns out to be rumor and becomes a class for watch recruits on why rumors are alive. Tia's priest writes a note about grace that makes a clerk in the hall cry while stamping it, and the clerk doesn't stop stamping. On a night when the harbour is a pane of iron and the stars are arranged as if someone with taste got the job for once, he walks the seaward wall with Severin. They don't speak much. A gull skates the air like the thought of grace. Below, a woman pulls a child's blanket up with the authority of love. Above, a griffin turns a slow circle and looks like a seal on a letter nobody should open if they're not meant to. He says, finally, "I will not always be here." She nods, as if he had observed weather. "Your lanes will," she says. "Your rules will if we want them. Your refusal will if we teach it." "That is the point," he says. He looks out past the breakwater, where the last pieces of the nautiloid are still being repurposed into benches and useful lies. Beyond that is a line where the night begins to be someone else's. Beyond that is a sky where ships will look for the seam he carries. Beyond that is work. He does not promise the city he will never leave. He promises the city it will never be alone if it keeps saying its names. At dawn, he posts his report like any other professional with too much to do and not enough time to hide. He writes in the clear hand that forgives mistakes by refusing to make them twice. The heading is not poetry, it is procedure. Romalia steals a copy and frames it because even thieves need to see how law looks when it loves them. The last image is not him. It is a boy on the high road teaching a girl to breathe on the odd beats, so a spark will sit down in her palm instead of shivering out. They say their names to each other, not as armor, not as performance, just because it feels good to be called correctly by somebody who intends to keep you. Above them, somewhere that can be called a galaxy, only by people who carry maps in their bones. The bearing light slides along wild space like a seam that refuses to split. It does not wash worlds clean. It stitches. Where it passes, choices make a sound. Where it remains, names stay.